Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. My name is Brian Driscoll. I'm the publisher at irishbreakdown.com, and I am joined by this guy, Ryan Roberts from Coast to Coast Scouting. Ryan also does some pieces for Irish Breakdown, and his specialty, his expertise, is the NFL Draft. And so what we're going to talk about today is Ryan has had some really interesting features at Irish Breakdown. He's put out some draft evaluations of Kyle Hamilton, who you have said is, if I'm correct, one of the best draft prospects you've ever seen, correct, on that?
Yeah.
We've also – go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, so far, if the prelim did end the way I graded him, he would be the top-rated safety I've ever had, and right now he's the top-rated guy I have for 2022 as well.
Okay. You've also done a breakdown on Jarrett Patterson. You had a mock draft recently that we'll get into that had both of them in the first round. You've done Kyron Williams. Today at irishbreakdown.com, you have a draft evaluation of Jason Ademilola. Next week, you're going to have one of Isaiah Foskey, and those are the guys that we're going to talk about today, and we may talk about a few more. We're going to see. But we're going to talk NFL Draft and Notre Dame today, what those players, kind of things that Ryan is looking for from them as we go into the 2022 season. But, you know, Ryan, you're also a Notre Dame fan. We've talked about this before, and it is interesting to see kind of how the Notre Dame draft is evolving. Early on under Kelly's tenure, you started to see more first-round picks. The last couple years, not as many first-round picks, but more overall picks. And I have a feeling that in the next 2 years, we're going to see a combination of those two. That's where we're going to kick off first. So the first two players we're going to talk about, we're going to begin this breakdown with Kyle Hamilton. And I'm going to have you talk about what you see from Kyle Hamilton, why you think he's such a high pick, and then we'll get into the mock draft aspect of it. So Kyle Hamilton, you have, as you said, so far the best player in the 2022 draft. And there's a lot more film you're going to be diving through. This whole next month, Ryan is going to be, like me, nerding it up, watching film, which I love. That's why I like Ryan. That's why he's my guy. But so far he's there, and he has a chance to be the best. He's one of the best safeties you've ever seen. So what is it about Kyle Hamilton that makes him so unique for you, Ryan?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of combinations. I know we're going to get more specifically in the mock draft, but so I had, just kind of to spoil it for a second. Like, I had him as potentially the highest drafted safety since 1991 Arizona,
right,
which would have been, just thinking about that for a second is pretty outstanding, because not only is he potentially the second highest safety drafted since 1991, he would also be the second highest safety that's drafted ever. So obviously I have high regard for Mr. Hamilton. What I think makes him so special is a combination of things. One, the unteachables is what you start in scouting. Like, you're looking for that body type, height, length, all those things that make players special, the things that you can't teach too well, the stuff that you can't coach out of. Kyle Hamilton is 6'4", 220 pounds, really long arms. From a range perspective, he is exceptionally fast for his size. So when we're talking about range on the back end, we're talking about a guy that, when you combine that foot speed with the length that he has, the stride length, he can cover a ton of ground. And for a Notre Dame defense that has been very talented over the last few years, I think I heard you say it on a podcast, a couple of days ago. I think they've had 5 defensive linemen drafted in general over the last couple of years.
Yeah, you'd have 4 defensive ends. Your entire 2 deep from the 2018 and 2019 defensive end groups were all drafted 5th round or higher.
Yeah. And then you have guys like Alohi Gilman, who was drafted, Troy Pride Jr., who was drafted. So he plays on a very talented defense over the last couple of years. But what makes him so special is, at that size profile, you would assume that, hey, he's your tight end eraser. He's that strong safety type that's going to come up. He's
Steve Atwater. He's a modern-day Steve Atwater is who you'd think he would be. Right.
Right. I threw a comparison to Kenny Easley that used to play with the Seattle Seahawks back in the day. Same type of profile, 6'3", 215-plus pounds.
Real quick, hold on. Kenny Easley went to UCLA, but this is going to be a little inside joke. But where's Kenny Easley from? Oh, that's right. He went to Kempsville High School in Virginia, so he's a Virginia boy. So yes, okay, back on track.
Had to throw the Virginia plug in there, Brian. I love it. But so I compared him to these guys, right? And you mentioned Atwater, and you can mention a couple other guys that are rare football players. You don't see safeties that size, the Sean Taylors of the world. Like, you don't see guys that physically look like that. And he's such a special athlete. Erase the preconceived notion for a second. He's playing single high free safety a ton for Notre Dame, which you don't see at that size. Like, you just do not see it. And he does it well. Like I said, he covers a ton of ground. But when he moves to the next level, I don't think that's going to be his best role. Like, he's going to be a split field safety, absolutely. He can play single high, moderately. Like he could do that, absolutely. But what makes him really special to me is that when you drop him down, you roll coverage, and maybe he's man-to-man against the slot. Again, your preconceived notion was like that size against tight ends, tight end eraser, right? Easy money. But then you see him against guys like Amari Rodgers, who just went in the 3rd round. You see him against guys like Tutu Atwell, running deep over routes and getting pass breakups on him, running
small, shifty, fast guys that you wouldn't expect the 6'4" safe to be able to play with.
The rise of the nickel, right? You want these smaller, shiftier, change of direction guys that are able to stick with those guys. You wouldn't see a 6'4", 220-pound guy playing with a 160-pound slot receiver, but Kyle Hamilton can do it. And not only do it, he excels at it. The flexibility, the change of direction for a guy his size is rare. And for the scouting side of everything, every former and current scout that I've ever been around is the word rare is not uttered too often. You don't throw that around lightly. You do not. You have excellent, you have very good, like all these different adjectives. Rare is something that you're a little tentative of because it's exactly what it said. It's rare. It's generational. It doesn't happen. It doesn't come around too often. Kyle Hamilton can do all those things. Plus, hey, as a tackler, bringing him down, we saw the play against Clemson. Travis Etienne's running outside zone. You drop him down as that extra defender in the box, and he gets this tackle for loss where the angle wasn't even great, but he has such a tackle radius that he's able to be a flexible athlete, change his direction, change his angle, and make a huge play against a guy that is a 4'4" athlete and just went in the 1st round. Everything that he does is special to me. And the craziest part is he is not perfect yet. He is not the best version of himself. And if it's the best version that we ever get of Kyle Hamilton, he's an easy 1st-round pick. But with this summer scouting of projecting forward, how good can this be? I don't think that there's a ceiling. I think the ceiling is the roof with this young man. I think that he could assume so many different roles. I don't think there's a limitation to his game. Rare is the word that I keep coming back to with a player like him.
Let's talk about a couple of those things because I think you hit this right on the head. He was a true sophomore last year, really in his 1st season as a full-time starter. So he has not reached his full peak. So let's talk about some of the things that you're going to be looking for when you pop on the film this year of Kyle Hamilton to say, hey, these are the parts of the game that I want to see him improve upon to take his game to an even another level, which is, it's really kind of insane to think about that because he was a 2nd-team All-American. Well, actually, a couple people had him as a 1st-team All-American. He was a guy that had a ton of production the last couple of years in all types of ways. But then we're looking at it, and I agree with you. There's plenty of, I'm not talking about like little modern improvements. There's room for him to make, in my opinion, somewhat big jumps in his game this year.
Yeah, no, I think the biggest one for me is I go back to that Alabama game in the playoff. The one play where they ran, I forget what the combination was of the front side, but they ran a wheel. It was Slade Bolton ran a wheel down the sideline, and Kyle Hamilton is rotating down, and he kind of is a little bit of a flat foot read, and he makes this incredible angle to the sideline, has this pass break against Slade Bolton. For me, he got a little flat-footed, and he didn't read it as well as he could have. If we're talking about a step before, maybe he makes a play on that football where he's pulling down an interception. Maybe it's a little bit of a change.
And they scored on that drive. That's that. You talk about, hey, look, to win a championship, that's the kind of play where if you're executing your technique and your assignment correctly, that's a pick instead of a pass breakup, which at that time of the game could have been a huge momentum changer.
Oh, absolutely. 100% could have. And that's the thing is, a player is special when you're nitpicking the good plays he made because it was still a phenomenal play. Like I watched it over and over again. I'm like, that range for that size it's just stupid. It doesn't make any sense. Guys shouldn't be able to do that. But if he becomes a little more, right now he's very reactionary, which is fine. Yeah. But I'm talking about the difference between being reactionary and being proactive, being able to see it just a split second sooner, being able to take advantage of that. Because we have seen when the ball is near him, he's got really good ball skills. He's got good hands. Everything is good there. Just that subtle difference of just seeing more reps, seeing it, being a different position.
That's it right there. It's an experiential thing. It's, look, as a true sophomore, he was – and I thought Clark Lee did a great job of protecting him a little bit as a true freshman with Jalen Elliott, with Alohi Gilman. Last year was really a lot. So, for example, you look at the ACC title game. This is another area that kind of leads into what you're talking about. I think that flat-footedness coming from the Bama game is coming from Kyle tends to get a little bit, I call this nosy, where he's like, hey, that's not your job. You got to work on your job. And I think he so wants to make plays that he's going to maybe do things he shouldn't. A perfect example is the touchdown pass to Amari Rodgers. He's playing center field. Trevor Lawrence just looks him off, and he just takes off running, just that little head turn. A veteran safety's like, nah, that head turn ain't working for me, buddy. I got to see you get to here before I'm getting off. And so he overreacts, and then Trevor comes right back and bangs that. So you have a third-year starting quarterback who's been in the playoff, national title game twice against a true sophomore freshman, true sophomore safety who's, playing against Trevor Lawrence for the first time. And that's another area where it's that experiential thing, but then also saying, hey, trust your job, trust the instincts, and that kind of thing is another thing I saw from him.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to just trusting what you're taught every day in practice too, because usually we would talk about, hey, it's safety, we're going to get a little depth, and then we're going to be able to react, or we're going to be proactive. But for him, I mean, you mentioned it, right? Like, he's flat-footed a ton. Why? Because when he was in high school, he could turn and run, and he could make up that ground, and he has tremendous recovery speed. If he is able to just get a little depth, that Bolton play I keep coming back to a little bit, Slade Bolton, if he just is able to be a little proactive, but then also to get his proper depth and then be able to come downhill instead of attacking on a 45-degree angle, open up and flipping to your hips, we're talking about saving another couple steps there. So those are just the things. I think trusting his technique more than just his natural ability is going to take him even to a much higher degree. And I think everything kind of really stems off of that, because again, I saved the tackling to the end of like my little excerpt there. It's just because he's so solid. Like, he doesn't miss tackles. But again, we're talking about, hey, instead of making a huge hit for a 5-yard gain, maybe you're a little quicker to react and get downhill, and maybe it's a 2-yard gain. Maybe it's a tackle at the line of scrimmage. It's just that little split second of seeing it a little faster, I think, is going to separate him from being an outstanding prospect to one of these rare level ones that I'm talking about.
I say the one thing I've seen from him from a tackling standpoint is when he arrives at the ball, he's good. I do think at times, however, I've seen him take his angles need to improve a little bit, because he will come a little bit flat, and it's kind of like you talked about with that pass play where he's able to overcome it in college, but as you know, like making that play in college and making that play in the NFL is a little bit of a different thing.
Well, it's even the play I highlighted on the Travis Etienne outside zone where he had to kind of change his angle of pursuit. It's the fact of, like, the angle was not good to start, and that's fantastic that he's that flexible and he's that quick twitch that he can, change his direction. But if he changes direction earlier, that plays a much easier play for him to make. So I think it just all spurns from that again, just quick second more, and then we can make those things a lot easier for ourselves.
Something else I like about Kyle Hamilton that to me, and I saw this going back to his freshman year, his first fall camp, I remember a play where he was matched up against Kyron Williams. And Kyron Williams just screwed him into the ground, had him in a circle on a corner route. And you're like, okay, young buck needs to learn how to cover that. Never made that mistake again. Like, the next time they tried it on him, he was patient. So that's the thing, is he has such from what I've seen, and again, I watch him, I get to watch him a little bit more than you do, and you're catching up to me, right, as you get into this. But, seeing him in practice and things that we were able to see his freshman year, his football IQ, his intelligence, his recall, where, you may beat me once, but you better make it count, because you're never going to beat me that way again. That is another one of those rare traits that you just don't see. Like Jeremiah Wusu-Kormo, there's things you could bait him on for the last 2 years, right? That you could sucker him. And you and I have talked a little bit about this. If you don't score the first time you beat Kyle Hamilton, you missed an opportunity, because it's not going to happen again. And the next opponent's not going to be able to do it again.
Yeah. So, I spoke a lot about the unteachables for the most part of this segment. And then the other side of it is, and this is where down the line it's going to matter a lot more than right now, because right now we're watching film and we're going to try to project forward. But it's a young man that you just talked about. I actually had the opportunity to interview Kyle when he was in high school coming out of Georgia. And the first time I spoke to him was before he got the big bump in the recruiting, and he was still a 3-star by every recruiting service around. Oh, except Brian Driscoll, of course. I apologize. For the majority of recruiting platforms, I was still considered a 3-star recruit. And the thing that he spoke a lot about was, freshman, sophomore year, he hadn't hit his growth spurt yet, right? He's 5'9", 5'10". He hadn't gotten to that 6'3", 6'4", stature that he had that, exploded him on the recruiting scene. And I think that does pay huge dividends. This is a little more of speculation, because you probably know the young man a lot more than I do. I only talked to him a couple of times. But that little chip on your shoulder, right? Like the ability to learn and process things, I'm sure that it's been because things haven't always come easy for him. He hasn't always been the dude every
Yeah.
single time he steps
He
on the
wasn't
field.
6'4" as an eighth grader, and exactly.
Right.
And he also comes from a really academically focused family. The high school he went to, Marist, is a very good high school. It is not a sports high school. If he was going somewhere for sports, he would not have gone to Marist. And then also his brother went to Penn. His older brother went to play basketball at Penn. So there's a lot. There's just not, like you said, there's not really any holes. And the things that you could perceive right now as holes are all correctable technique, adjustment, assignment stuff. There's no, like with Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah, as great as he was, there was he's a 6'1", 215-pound linebacker, essentially.
Yep.
Whereas, Kyle Hamilton is sort of a safety version of Isaiah Simmons, a more natural safety version of Isaiah Simmons, where you're trying to teach Isaiah Simmons to play safety next level. Kyle Hamilton can do that, and it'll be easier for him to kind of come down as his body matures, because again, he had a sophomore body. If you see Kyle, he's still got a little bit of a baby face. He's still very young. He's going to fill out, and so now you're talking about a guy that can, like you said, can be a really unique weapon in the NFL, that you can play him in so many different ways and play at elite level in so many different ways. So you had him, you said, going 3rd overall in the NFL draft, right?
Yep.
You had Jarrett Patterson, Notre Dame center Jarrett Patterson. You also had as a first-round pick. You had him going number 60. Now, we don't know yet if he's going to play center or guard, whatever the case may be, but
right.
That's not going to really affect. If anything, it'll enhance his draft grade. So when you break down the film of Jarrett Patterson, he's now played 2 full years at Notre Dame. What is it that you see on film that makes you say, okay, that's going to get Notre Dame back on track to being that team that produces first-round picks?
I mean, first of all, so I went back to the 2019 film to just watch a little bit of him as a redshirt freshman, just to get a feel of where he improved most in his game. And I thought that the improvements from 2019 to 2020 before he was injured was substantial. And that's to be expected of a guy that had, he was a left tackle recruit. So he didn't play center, right? Like he's just playing center for the first time in 2019. So that transition from 2019 to 2020, I think you saw substantial growth. And I think that he was one of the best centers in all of college football before he got injured and he missed the latter stages of the season. What is, again, the unteachable part of everything for the center position, especially 6'4.5", fantastic. That's great length for the inside. Absolutely. 300 plus pounds, which I think that he can add a bunch of weight because he's got a really clean frame. There's not bad weight on that frame. There's still room to grow there. And I think that he is a very good athlete for the interior. I think that wide zone teams that are going to ask a guy to, hey, do some combos. I want you to work laterally, get to the second level, move in space a little bit. I think Jarrett Patterson does that stuff very well. I do think that Jarrett does need to improve a little bit. I still think that there's a little bit of core strength that he needs to add. And I just talked about how his frame is very projectable. I think that he can get a lot bigger. I think that he can get a lot stronger, more importantly than just adding mass. I need it to be good weight. So I think that there is a baseline for being very good. And I compared him to Alex Mack in my report, which is high regards. Alex Mack has been one of the best centers over the last 10 plus years in the NFL. For me, what separates Jarrett Patterson is I think everything's very projectable in the run game. One of the best pass blockers I've seen over the last couple of years from the center position. That left tackle background, I think, really does help him because he understands framing. He's always well on balance. He doesn't lunge. Patient against movement up front when you're seeing different stunts and twists and blitz looks and all this different stuff. I think from a pass protection perspective, he can go into the NFL right now and be one of the better pass blocking centers in the league. And then we're talking about projectability. I think in the run game, it's very projectable to being, hey, maybe he's just a little more specific, not specific to a degree of like that he can only play in a zone scheme, but maybe that's his best fit early on. But I think eventually he's a guy that could, whether it's power, gap, whatever it is, I think that he can do all those different things. And I think that he has that baseline of athleticism and length and all these good things that the unteachables, again, to being a starting center relatively early in his career. And then, you mentioned it, if he's going to play guard this year, he's backed up tackle for a year. He's played center for 2. Now maybe he starts at guard. That versatility is huge on the interior. That gives you a lot of roster flexibility, a lot of roster construction flexibility. Hey, somebody gets hurt. You don't have to waste the 6th best player on our team is a center. Hey, maybe you toy around with, hey, Jarrett Patterson can move out to guard if the center is the 6th man off the bench. Like, there's a lot of flexibility that I think that he gives you, and I think that there's still a lot of projecting that needs to happen with him. But I really think that the baseline unteachables are very good to be a starting center at the next level.
So, Ryan, when you look at Jarrett Patterson, obviously, I think the athleticism is obvious, and the zone scheme, he'd be a great fit for the old school Denver Broncos system, that kind of thing. But when you look at him, so my question is how about teams that when you look at their opponents, okay, so we're playing, the Pittsburgh Steelers, and they're going to have a big nose guard, or, maybe where there's going to be more size and physicality, because again, that has to factor in when you're playing 6 guaranteed games against a certain division. You have to make sure that your guys that you're drafting can play well against that division as well. How do you see him handling sort of the power players in the NFL, the bigger, the stronger guys? How would he go against a Stephon Tuitt or a Hayward or guys like that at the next level?
Well, I think there is going to be definitely an adjustment period. Like there's going to be, he's a guy that's going to have some struggles in some different areas. Like it's going to happen because I think that there's a definite improvement that needs to happen from a core strength and just a physicality perspective. It's going to need to happen early. One thing that I think he has going for him is I think he's such a good athlete and he's a very pretty rock solid technician. There's obviously still work to be done there, but I think as long as we're hitting leverage points and aiming points consistently, it'll help him a lot. Trying to to alleviate the difference in the power and the strength component versus who he's going against. But I think that everything is there for him to develop in that area. Just right now, I still think he's a young kid. He's only played 2 years on the college level. He's going into his 4th year of college. Like there's definitely some improvements that need to happen physically. So I think that he is going to have some struggles in those areas, and I think teams are going to kind of figure that out. But hey, when we get into an NFL weight and strength and conditioning program and get some extra pounds on him and get some extra strength on him, I think he'll be more than fine. But I think that they're, the teams that you mentioned, the wide zone, San Francisco 49ers, I know LA Rams kind of went a little away from the wide zone this year, but those teams that really specialize in that are going to really have a lot of interest in him. But I think that he has more than enough of that profile and projectability to eventually be able to be a scheme diverse player.
Ryan, before we move on, are you able to turn your volume up on your mic just a little bit? I have a few people that are having a hard time hearing you. Plus, I'm so loud that, it's a curse. You had him going 16 overall, I believe, to the Steelers in your draft. Was that more of you think he is sort of that's his range, or was that more of a bit of a projecting or a bit of a reach for the Steelers because of a dire need for interior blockers for them?
I think it's a mix of both. I think that when you're talking about, hey, there's, to be very honest with you, the offensive tackle group is not great in 2022. Mm-hmm. Is Mike a little better, by the way?
Yes, you're good. Yep, okay. You're good.
So offensive tackle, you're trying to find guys. Like we talked about Sean Ryan from UCLA the other day. I'm a big fan of him. I think Evan Neal from Alabama is going to be a guy that's very valued just because of the size profile and playing 3-year star for Alabama, all that good stuff. But outside of those couple guys, you're really projecting. So I think offensive tackle class is going to move a lot of these guards and centers up a little bit because teams are always need to improve offensive line. Like that is a big thing that needs to happen. I think it's a great interior offensive line class, but I think Jarrett has more than enough talent to compete with the Kenyon Greens from Texas A&M's of the world. Those really good quality interior offensive linemen. Lacita Smith from Virginia Tech. There's a lot of really good interior players, but I think that he has more than enough talent to be in that conversation. And then you add in, I wrote offensive line, and more offensive line for the Pittsburgh Steelers. You are breaking in 5 new starters. Unless you want to count Zach Banner as a returning right tackle after playing 2 games or 1 game or whatever the heck he played. It's not going to be pretty, I don't think. And I don't think that they even have – you're potentially going to start Kendrick Green, who was the center coming out of Illinois, first-year player. Here's Kevin Dotson starting. You just drafted Trey Turner kind of out of desperation with the David DeCastro news. Right. So I think there's a heavy need, and I think that also, there's a lot of spots that are open there. So getting a guy that can potentially fit into a couple different spots makes a lot of sense for trying to find that best 5 kind of mentality.
And I'm really curious to see how he does at the combine. From a measurable standpoint, I want to see his arm length. I want to see, is he 6'4.5"? Does he have a couple inch longer wingspan than a Robert Hainsey? Because again, there's people going to know this kid played tackle in high school, and you talk about that pass. So is there a team that says, hey, we need a right tackle? Yeah, he didn't play it, but he fits that athletic profile. That's going to be something interesting, which is part of the reason I was hoping Notre Dame was going to move him to tackle to begin with. But then, of course, Blake Fisher turned out to be an absolute monster at left tackle and was like, yeah, we may want to use Jarrett somewhere else. So let's talk about Kyron Williams. This is a very interesting one for me because you have made a claim. I believe you've made this claim that you would not be surprised if Kyron Williams was the first running back off the board in the 2022 draft. Am I correct in saying that, or were you responding to somebody else saying that?
No, I did say that because I think that there is – I mean, so there's Breece Hall from Iowa State. There's Isaiah Spiller from Texas A&M. And then there's Kyron Williams. For me, like those three guys kind of stand out to me because they're the only three guys that I think projecting forward are – Kyron maybe a little less than the other two, but they're high-volume ball carriers, and they're guys that are going to touch the ball a ton. Because then you get to guys like Jerrion Ely out of Ole Miss, who is a really nice space player. Like, I really enjoyed his tape, but, like, is he going to carry the ball 200 times in a season?
Right.
At the next level? Probably not. He hasn't even done it in college yet. So I think that Kyron is in that conversation to start out with. Why I think he could be the first running back off the board is Breece Hall and Isaiah Spiller don't have a ton of production in the pass game right now, not like Kyron Williams does. And I think that, I mean, when I was texting you about him, I think you threw out, and I don't want to, hearsay on putting a comp out there for you, but I think you said like, oh, he reminds me a little of Clyde Edwards-Helaire, right? And I put
I think the things that attracted the NFL to Clyde Edwards-Helaire are things that will attract him. I don't love doing the comps from this guy's just like that guy, but it's more of his overall, what he brings to the game is going to be a similar package to what Clyde Edwards-Helaire brought to the game. And Kyron Williams as a sophomore was way more productive than what Clyde Edwards-Helaire was as a sophomore.
Yeah.
And it's that ability. And I actually think Kyron can take it to another level because a lot of what Clyde Edwards-Helaire did in the pass game was as out of the backfield.
And out guy. Yeah.
Traditional. I mean, I think of that great concept that they ran for a touchdown against Bama, where he was offset in a shotgun, and they cleared the routes out. He comes in and runs a corner route from like the 15-yard line. Great concept. He can do some of that stuff. What I think gives Kyron a heads up is, number one, I think Kyron's an inch or two taller, not a whole lot taller.
Yeah.
But I think that Kyron is a more natural player that you can actually use out of the traditional running back stuff. And that's the unique thing that I think he brings to the table that I think NFL teams are going to love. And you say, well, Kyron's not a burner. Well, Clyde Edwards-Helaire ran a 4.6 flat at the pro day and the combine. Yeah. So, again, that's assuming Kyron's going to make a jump. And anyone that knows Kyron Williams knows he is not a kid that's going to be like, yeah, okay, I had a good year, I'm going to rest on my laurels. No, he is a hungry – you talk about a chip on your shoulder – He's got multiple. He's got I'm short, right? He's got that chip on his shoulder. 3-star recruit, all these kind of things. He's a kid. Chris Tyree's better than me, and all this other kind of stuff. He is a hungry, and he plays with an energy that you just love from that position.
Yeah, and I think the guy that kept popping in my head when watching him was Devontae Freeman, because I think that they both run with a similar low center of gravity. And kind of like what you're saying, why could he be the first running back off the board? Because we just saw it happen. We just saw them. And I mentioned that to say Clyde Edwards-Helaire went over Jonathan Taylor and DeAndre Swift, who from a physical perspective look more what you think of as a traditional
as
cow.
Pure running backs. They're better players than he is. But that's not what the NFL is looking for to be a higher pick.
Absolutely. And then we throw everything in. So Kyron Williams has great low center of gravity, always seems to finish forward. He has good contact balance. Everything is good there from a zone perspective. I think he has very nice vision. I think that he does have some misreads from times, but I've seen him hit front side. I've seen him hit backside A all the way, bend it all the way back. I have seen all those different things that tells me that he is a natural zone runner. And then he has a little more power than you would anticipate. I think that his speed is not tremendous, but hey, short area explosiveness, he can hit a gap and he can go. That is no problem. He's got good start and stop. He's got that to him. And then the pass game perspective, I think that he is a guy, because I remember reading that, he had spent some time at wide receiver while he was
like a 1,000-yard receiver at one point in time in high school. He finished his career, I believe, with over 2,000 yards rushing and over 2,000 yards passing. And the last kid to do that to sign with Notre Dame was Golden Tate.
Yeah.
Golden went the opposite direction. Golden started as a running back and went to receiver. Kyron started as a receiver and went to running back.
Yeah, and you could see it when you watch Kyron, is that he is very natural in the pass game. It's easy to project, and I think that Notre Dame could have even used him more, especially in the screen game. I would have loved to see him kind of work in that screen game. I think he could be fantastic in that area. And then the thing that takes you most off guard, and it's a little bit with the Clyde Edwards-Helaire thing again, is that Kyron Williams is a very good pass protector.
Yeah.
He is not he is. I mean,
so he's got to want to there, right? Like, so for me as a coach, there's a lot of things that he's got to clean up. He'll miss assignments in pass pro.
Absolutely.
Sometimes he gets caught where he doesn't lock and he'll get knocked back. There's things like, but that's all technique that can be fixed. And I've said this my whole career as a receiver and a running back, 90% of being a great blocker is, do you want to be a great blocker or not?
Absolutely.
And Kyron will bring it. I mean, and we've seen him make some big time save Ian Book from getting drilled blocks the last season, this past season.
And you could see that chip on his shoulder that you talked about earlier, because, I mean, I think about the blocking on James Skalski, even though Ian Book got sacked on that play, like pile drived him. And you see him get up, and just because Skalski's kind of their vocal leader, right? Like he's that guy for Clemson, and he's right there. Like, I'm right here, brother. Like, we can do this all day, every day. So I think that he is outstanding potential as a pass blocker. I think that he's an easy projection as a pass receiver, and I think he has natural instincts as a runner. I think he's short area explosive. I think that he gets that hidden yardage. Like so many times on film, it's like, he's right near the first down line, and then he just maneuvers his body a certain way, contorts it, gets that extra yard. And for that coaching background that you're talking about, coaches love that stuff, man. The guys that get that hidden yardage that do add up to make a difference in a football game. I think Kyron does that, and I think that the Clyde Edwards-Helaire projection, like why he would be, would be perceived as a better fit on the NFL level than a guy like a Breece Hall, even though I do like Breece Hall and the Isaiah Spillers of the world. I think that there's a clearer projection to how the NFL operates now.
When you talk about that maximizing yardage thing, there's two things that stand out to me. Number one is he made a lot of guys miss in the backfield. I remember the one long run against Florida State where Janarius Robinson he was drafted this past year, right? Janarius was
fourth round,
right?
I think. Yeah.
He comes off the edge, and he's got Kyron in his sights on the edge, and there's nobody that blocks him. And Kyron just makes a miss, and he's gone for like 30, 40 yards, 20, 30 yards. That's a unique thing. Like, that's what separated him from Josh Adams, for example. Like, Josh Adams was, if there was a crease, Josh Adams was gone. Yeah. But Josh Adams was making no one miss, right? It was a lot of that was line yards, where Kyron is making backyards where he's getting queued up in the backfield and he's got to make a guy miss. And the other one is, I have a feeling, Ryan, and you correct me if I'm wrong, NFL scouts are going to love his Pitt film. Now, statistically, that was one of his least effective games, just statistically, because Pitt was keyed towards stopping the Notre Dame run game, and so when you look at it, Kyron didn't really have sexy numbers. He had 17 carries for 38 yards, and you say, well, that's what NFL scouts are going to love. But I'm like, yeah, because there was a lot of -2s that turned into +2s in that game against Pitt, and there was a lot of 3rd and 1s where it's like there wasn't anywhere to run, but he just was able to find that hole, and he's got a really strong lower body. Really thick lower body. And so you may look at it and say, that's not a sexy game for an All-American list, but as a coach, as a scout, it's like, give me that, because I know if I need a yard, I don't have to sub him out. I mean, he can literally do it all. And I think that's something that they're going to really like.
Well, the Pitt game was actually one that I made sure that I wanted to watch. It was one that I did for my evaluation, was the fact of, like, not only that, like, I wanted to see why was that lower yardage total? Was it an effective game? Because stats do lie. Box scores can absolutely not tell the full story and the full scope. In that game, I mean, we had some free runners on the second level. Number 36 from Pitt, I mean, was blitzing A and B all day. Just didn't even seem like there was any coordination to it. You have guys like Pat Jones and Rashad Weaver who are drafted, and there's guys on that Pitt defense that are going to play in the NFL, which is another reason why I wanted to watch the film. And I think that you're absolutely correct. And I think even more than scouts is when scouts, because scouting departments and coaches need to work together. It needs to be a well-coordinated machine when you're putting your draft board together. And quote, coaches are going to love that film. Absolutely love it, because again, those are the hidden yardage. And I know people always make fun of, an inch here and an inch there makes a difference in a football game, like the Al Pacino speech, right? And they're like, oh, that's very cliche. And it is a cliche, but from a coaching background, it's 100% true. It's just a few plays a game. It's a couple yards. It's an inch here. It's a better technique here. Those things do make a big difference. And I think Kyron Williams is a coach's dream and a guy that has that chip and has that want to be a great football player.
If you all want to get a question in for Ryan, just make sure you hit a super chat if you want to ask him about one of these guys we're going to talk about. But we're going to keep rolling through here because, Ryan, we're only going to have you for about an hour or so today because Ryan has a little one at home. So a brand new baby, relatively brand new. I guess she's not so brand new now. But So he doesn't quite have the long 2-3 hours to give that I have to give because, like I said, I have the 4-legged kind. So let's move into, to me, the most intriguing player on the board. Well, one of two very intriguing players. The next two, to me, are the most intriguing players for Notre Dame. And the first one we're going to talk about, they both play on the same side of the ball. The first one I want to talk about is Jason Ademilola. This is a prospect to me that when you look at just the numbers on a production per snap basis, he's been Notre Dame's best defensive tackle the last few seasons. Yep. Now he's in a situation where he's going to get more volume, and he's got to prove that he can stay healthy because the last couple of years when he was getting ready to kind of take off, he'd get like a little ding here, a little ding there. But he's a guy that I look at and I say, this can be you mentioned Kyron Williams at Alabama, who went from just mediocre production as a rotation guy to a dominant All-American year. I like Sheldon Day example for me. Sheldon was always a good player, and then as a senior just blew up, went to 15.5 tackles for loss. Mm-hmm. He is my number one breakout player for Notre Dame from a college football standpoint.
Sure.
Let's talk NFL draft, though. What do you see from Jason Ademilola? You have a story at irishbreakdown.com today on him, so check that out. There's some film in there. But what are the things that you see to say, boy, NFL teams are going to love that about him?
Well, being a fan of Notre Dame, like I follow recruiting closely. So I remember, and I'm a New Jersey guy too. So I remember when they got Jason and Justin and Shane Simon, all from St. Peter's. Like I remember it was a big thing. And of course, Jason was, when I'm talking about the Ademilola brothers, like he was the guy. Like Justin was a good football player, obviously, and is still playing at Notre Dame, and it's going to have a bigger role to my understanding. But Jason was that, hey, high 4-star, like you're the defensive tackle, you're the gap penetrator, you're the playmaker type of player. And he's been like you said, a good rotational player. He has been productive when playing. And, you kind of wonder, like, what has been holding him back? And you mentioned the injuries a little bit. And I think that there's just been, maybe a little bit of misuse at times with a guy like Jason Ademilola trying to get him on the football field.
Right. It's let's play the veteran kind of thing. Right.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So I think that there has been, hey, I would love to see a higher volume. I will tell you this. I popped on the Alabama game where I think he had 5 tackles, like a tackle and a half for loss, like, productive game. He was dominant in that football game. And
Ryan, even on the play where Najee Harris leaps over Nick McLeod, if you go watch what Jason Ademilola did on that game, he took a 320-pound dude and drove him like 4 yards into the backfield on that play.
Absolutely. And it's like, okay, so Landon Dickerson didn't play in that game, but Chris Owens is a good, solid, college offensive lineman playing center. We had Deontay Brown, who just went in the 3rd round by the Carolina Panthers, 4th round, somewhere in that range. And then we had
4th.
Somewhere in that ballpark. So he's an NFL guard, and then the Ejiofor, or however you pronounce his name, the other guard. Yeah. So he's going to be drafted as well. So you're playing against a good interior offensive line, especially from a college perspective. Like they were one of the best offensive lines in college football last year. Like everybody's that's not hot take here. Like that they were, and he went in as a rotational defensive lineman and dominated them. And there were a few reps where, honestly, there was one rep that I highlighted that was just, he had credit for like an assisted tackle because they have great hustle play, working from inside out. But like he made this play where he's lined up as 3 tech, outside shoulder of Deontay Brown, slants inside to his inside shoulder. There's a slide protection. So he ends up going like almost head to head with Chris Owens. And he just makes this quick little move where he makes Chris Owens fall flat on his face, and he just ghosts him. And for those types of plays, those are exemplary of like what makes him a special football player potentially is that he is incredibly flexible, incredibly explosive for an interior defensive lineman. Like it is unnatural, that play in particular, to see those types of things because they're working in condensed space. They're working in tight space. They're working against multiple offensive linemen for the most part. And he just does this move where I'm just like, what, dude, that is special. Like body control on that, it's not ordinary. It's not. And you've seen it in spurts. So I graded everything up, Ryan. I'm writing down my numbers and I'm like, I'm going through the list. And at the end, I have a high 3rd round grade for a guy that has barely played. And I'm like, for a second, I'm questioning myself. I'm like, I may need to go back and look at this again. And
is my Notre Dame fandom like maybe taken? No, I think it's a fair thing to think about. Like, okay, he's a Notre Dame guy. Maybe I'm being a little bit, too kind to him. But no, you're not wrong. You're not wrong.
Well, I even went back to, a game from 2019, and it was against Navy, which isn't the greatest example because, you're playing against undersized linemen who are cut blocking a ton, and it's not really incredibly translatable. But then I even went again, and I rewatched the Alabama game to make sure I'm seeing what I'm seeing, and I'm confident in it from a physical perspective, from a talent level perspective, that if he has a full volume of snaps, you mentioned the Quinnen Williams thing. I was comparing it in the sense of like Quinnen Williams was a redshirt sophomore when he had his breakout year. So the two previous years he redshirted, and then the second year he had 20 total tackles, 6.5 tackles for loss. Jason has played 3 seasons at Notre Dame, going into his 4th, where he's been a part-time player. His best season was 25 tackles and 4 tackles for loss. That was his best productive season. Eerily similar, and I'm not sitting here and saying that, hey, he is going to be a top 3 pick in the NFL draft, because Quinnen Williams was the 3rd overall selection by the New York Jets, fantastic football player. His 2019 film was ridiculous. Like, it was just phenomenal. But I am saying is that I think that this kid has top 100 potential. I think that he could be a 2nd to 3rd round pick if he has a full volume of snaps, because I think there's some special qualities on the interior. And for NFL, again, which is going so heavy passing, creating space, manipulating space, having interior defensive linemen that could potentially be this type of gap penetrating player, this traditional 3 tech that has the flexibility to attack an outside shoulder and bend a little bit, and has the ability to work gaps and explode gaps and be that force. I think Jason has some substantial upside. And I know that there are some guys that have him graded very low or maybe even priority free agent, but I think that when you're projecting forward here, I think Jason is going to have a huge rise, and he's going to be a guy that we're going to look back at on some of the scouting perspective for guys that aren't close to the Notre Dame coverage, and they're going to say, why wasn't I talking about this kid? Because this kid has that potential to be that good, in my opinion.
And you look at Sheldon Day, was an early 4th round pick. Yep. Obviously, Sheldon played a lot more than Jason did, but I think what Jason brings to the table is a better body. In my opinion, a little more length, a little more height, and better conditioning of that body. Okay. The other thing I think is about Jason that you look actually at him and his brother both. Yep. They showed up at Notre Dame really understanding how to use their hands, and that is so important at the next level, because you and I have seen guys that were great college players go to the NFL as D linemen and do nothing, because in college they could just push people around. They were just. You get to the NFL and you don't know how to use your hands, you're not going to be a very good football player. And that's what separates the combine warriors from Von Miller. It's that knowing how to play the game. Von Miller's not the only freaky athletic defensive end that's ever played in the NFL. It's just understanding of how to win is huge. And that's where something I see from Jason, where he has shown me that. The thing that I need to see from him this year, and part of this has been scheme. I mean, look, you're not going to make 15 tackles for loss as a defensive tackle under Clark Lee. Jerry Tillery had 2 run game tackles for loss in 2018 when he's an All-American, right? I think he had 10.5 tackles for loss and 8.5 sacks. Yeah. So there hasn't been a lot of run game production from the tackles. This is what they weren't asked to do. That's going to change this year under Marcus Freeman. So I need to see him finish at the ball more. Now, and again, I'm not saying I'm dinging him for that, because that's just not what they were asked to do. Tagovailoa didn't do it. Heinisch didn't do it. Tillery didn't do it. Again, all of Tillery's production came in the pass game. Yep. That's something that I need to see, and that's going to be the thing to me that's going to determine whether he is a 4th, 5th round pick or a guy that shoots up into being a day 2 pick. That's the thing for me that I need to see from him.
And I love the great mention of hands, and I definitely wanted to put that, because I mentioned that in my report, which was probably the biggest surprise I had, was you would think a guy that's listed at 279 pounds, and I'm not 100% sure of where he is exactly played at during his career, because I know
he's been in the 260s at times, but he's up to 285 now. But he's played at 260 to 270, low 270s at times. He doesn't play like he's that small, but he's now filled out. He's actually, from what I'm told, talking to a source, even now, getting through the end of summer workouts, he stayed in the mid 280s this entire summer, which in the past he would kind of
fluctuate.
Yeah, he would lose that.
Gotcha. And I was going to say that was my biggest thing that I noticed, was that your assumption would be a guy playing in the 270s, and you were saying down to the 260s at points. You would expect him to get displaced in gaps, just get ragdolled at points, down blocks, just destroy him. I think he has relatively good length for the position, but the thing that really surprised me was I think he has quick and very powerful hands. He's able to get that inside position, and he does not get blown out in gaps. I mentioned Deontay Brown that was playing at 360 pounds, 350, 360 pounds. Dude wasn't moving him at all. Like, it wasn't gaining an inch. Like, there's some plays where he's, maybe getting on his heels a little bit, and he's trying to play a little too far into the gap at times,
right,
and losing balance to a degree. But I think that his hands are quick and physical, and I think that as he continues to add core strength, I think that he has potential to be a really dominant player in the run game. And I think that the best thing about him, and this is going to sound a little odd to some people, I think his balance is tremendous. He does not get knocked on the ground ever, which is really rare. Like, we talk about it with offensive linemen a ton, right? Like, offensive linemen, we don't want them spending too much time on the ground unless they're, on top of somebody, right? But, like, I don't see him on the ground ever. I see his body get contorted in weird ways, and he's able to maintain balance and to still stay gap controlled. So I really do think that as long as this kid stays healthy, he's able to have a full workload, a full volume of snaps, I think that this could be potentially one of the biggest risers, because there's a lot of secondary defensive tackles and, in these tiers where I'm trying to find guys, because right after DeMarvin Leal, and this is another kind of layer, DeMarvin Leal from Texas A&M, who's kind of an odd player who actually plays more of that, like, defensive end, like a big defensive end at 290 plus pounds. Aside for him, there's not a ton of interior defensive linemen potentially that I am really that high on in this class. There's guys like Jordan Davis from Georgia, who is, that true nose, one tech, like he is going to eat up blocks. Like, he reminds me of John Henderson that used to play at Jacksonville. Like, he's that dude. But there aren't many guys that I think are true gap penetrating, affecting passing lanes, shooting gaps. Like, I don't see that production potential for a lot of guys. And I think that Jason does have that aspect, which I think, again, if he's able to put it on film this year, he could shoot up a lot of boards.
I think there's one more piece to this that's going to be important for Jason this year that was not there in the past. And again, this is not a criticism of Clark Lee. I think Clark Lee was phenomenal. It's just there's just different schemes. You use different schemes.
Right.
We're going to see Jason playing 5 technique this year. We're going to see him rushing on the edge at times this year. Him and Myron Tagovailoa. That, to me, is if he can show the ability to win on the edge as a power player, I think that's also something that boasts his draft stock, because now all of a sudden those 3-4 teams where you may question the fit, we know he can play 3 technique, but can he play out a gap basically? That answers those questions. Now because how it is, Ryan, is certain guys, 12 teams are going to love him because he fits their scheme, but these other 12 teams, they're not, because he's a great college player, but we don't. Right. He doesn't fit what we do. I think that's something that if he gets that opportunity, and I think he will this year when Marcus Freeman goes to the 3-man fronts, I think that's also something that could boost his draft stock as well.
No, and I think that's a great point. You mentioned Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah earlier, right? Like, there are some teams that just didn't have him on the board because they don't know what to do with a 215, 220-pound weak side linebacker.
Which tells me you need to find a new defensive coordinator.
Well, absolutely. No argument there. No argument.
If you don't know how to use Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, you need to find a new line of work.
Some defensive coordinators that are very stringent on what they do, though. They don't know how to get creative. They want that 235, 240 pound weak side linebacker, and that's just what they want. And if they don't have it, they're not going to use it. And I think that's one thing that you mentioned was, I think, odd man front teams, even front, whatever you do, I think Jason could potentially fit in there. And I think that showing that versatility, we're talking about scheme specifics versus scheme diversity. If you're a diverse football player, that means more teams want you. We talked about Kyle Hamilton. He is as scheme diverse as possible. Everybody wants Kyle Hamilton. There is no defense in the NFL that could not use a Kyle Hamilton. And the more that he makes, Jason speaking, the more that he makes it clear that he can play in multiple fronts, the more teams are going to like him, which gives him a better chance of getting drafted earlier, obviously.
I think that's a great way to, if you're looking to clean out your coaching staff or your scouting department, that's one thing you do. You bring him, hey, what are your thoughts on Kyle Hamilton? Do you think he fits our scheme? And if there's any hesitation at all, you say, okay, thank you for your time. Here's your severance package. Go find another place to work.
That's an easy job. That's an easy job right there. You want to have a little job interview and you don't know how to use Kyle Hamilton. All right. Have a great day.
Yeah.
Appreciate
okay. Well, thank you. You've answered that question for us. Have a nice life. Go work for someone who's going to draft in the top 10 every year.
Absolutely.
The last player I want to talk about, Ryan.
Yeah.
I want to talk to you about Isaiah Foskey. This is, to me, one of the more intriguing players. I've actually seen a mock draft that had him in the first round. Now, I think that's nuts right now because of just how little he's played. But I also understand it because I said when Notre Dame got him, this kid has as high of a ceiling as any Notre Dame defensive end that they've signed. Right. Now we're going to find out in 2021 if it's going to be more about potential, or are we going to actually start talking about that production? What are your thoughts on Isaiah Foskey? And, first of all, let's just talk about where he is now, and then also some of the things that you want to see from him as he goes into this 2021 season to make him a legitimate, okay, should we be talking about him as an NFL draft? Because if he doesn't, then he's just going to come back in 2022 and do it then. But what would you need to see? What do you see now, and what do you need to see from him? What are the things you could see from him that could maybe make him as a guy that, like this might be a guy that could come out and be a high draft pick?
Well, a guy, again, that lacks the volume we talked about with Jason, right? And a guy that's been productive, though, when he's played. I mean, I think he had 4.5 sacks last year in a part-time
200 some snaps, yeah.
Right. So he's had some production for the volume of sacks.
I think he's blocked 2 kicks in his career, right? Had one against Stanford in 2019, but I think he blocked the South Florida. Wasn't he the one that blocked?
I think so, yeah.
I thought he blocked another kick last year.
Yeah, no, and he's from a physical perspective – we're talking 6'5", 250, 255 pounds. Like, that's how you draw it up. Like, that's a 4'3" defensive end. Frustration to a degree of the usage sometimes for me because I see him dropping coverage a lot more than I would like it. I want him to attack.
I don't think we're going to see that as much under Clark. Under Marcus Freeman, yeah.
I certainly hope not. I want that kid to go forward all the time. I think that you see there's some raw flexibility there. I think that when he hits a corner, he has loose hips. I think that he can turn and run. And, everybody always talks about transitional quickness with wide receivers and cornerbacks. Transitional quickness for me for a defensive end is, hey, when you hit that third step up the arc, are you able to maintain that momentum and you're able to transition around the track? And I think that he has that. And I think that he is a loose, athletic kid, like every one of these players almost to a degree. I mean, he's a college kid, so he's going to need to continue to get stronger. Like I do see a lack of strength at some points in setting edge and doing all that type of stuff.
Right. It was a true sophomore last year, right? So like we talked about Kyle Hamilton, that's to be somewhat expected.
Absolutely. Yep. And I know, with Coach Bayless, I'm sure that he is, obviously working his tail off as usual. So I know that he is a explosive athlete from a physical perspective. Everything is there. It's just about snaps for him. It really is. And it's going to be a little tricky for this cycle because this cycle, we're talking about the edge group, the defensive ends and the 3-4 outside linebackers. It's a really good group. I mean, you got the Kayvon Thibodeaux and the George Karlaftis and Myjai Sanders. And there's a lot of really Adam Anderson from Georgia. There's a lot of really talented football players, but I do think that he has the talent to eventually assert himself. I mean, I know you said you saw somebody in the first round. I don't think that's out of question with the talent level that he has.
Talent level, I don't disagree with it at all.
Right. But you just haven't seen it though. That's I mean, there's projecting and then there's shooting for the moon a little bit. I think that let's hit the happy medium a little bit. I think day 2 is certainly possibility. Like because I don't think that he is a player that for the odd front teams that play a ton of base. Like I don't think he's going to be your traditional 3-4 outside linebacker. Maybe he could be like a Bud Dupree type for Pittsburgh. But for me, he is that traditional hand in the dirt 4-3 defensive end, even though he has rushed from a 2-point stance a ton. I think that's who he is. He needs to go forward. I think the raw tools are there. It's just about refinement, and honestly, it's just about playing football.
And I'm a Denver Bronco fan, as you know. I mean, could he be a Bradley Chubb type of guy in time?
Sure.
I mean, again, but I think that can be somewhat limiting. I think he's a guy you want to put. If you're a 4-down team, you're going to have your eye on this kid for sure. Absolutely. Now, one thing I think he needs to work on is kind of the opposite of what we talk about Jason Ademilola. I think with Jason and Justin, they showed up at Notre Dame really well schooled. They just know how to play football. They're very smart, instinct. They use their hands incredibly well. That's an area where Isaiah. There was a play that you had shown in your breakdown today of Jason on our site, and if you go watch it, it was indicative of how that game went. Where the Notre Dame defensive line, what people don't realize, they played really well that game, in my opinion. I mean, Mac Jones was scrambling. If you can't sack Mac Brown, then you need to find something else to do. Mac Jones was. I mean, he was as harassed that game as I'd seen him harassed all year.
He was.
And it wasn't just beating Chris Owens, without Landon Dickerson. There was a play where you showed Jason beating DeAndre Brown. Kurt Hinish just embarrassed. I think it was the Ekiyor kid at right guard. And then Isaiah just comes off the edge, and he's got Alex Leatherwood beat with the speed. But then Alex is able to get his hands on, and Isaiah didn't have that that quick hand move that you see to then finish off that block or finish off that rush. That's an area for me that it's like he is constantly beating tackles off the ball, but he doesn't have that hand play yet to then finish. And I think that's going to be the key for him. If he can take that part of his game, which I think he will, again, true sophomore who played only 4 games in light rotation as a freshman, because, again, you had in 2019, let's say, why didn't Isaiah Foskey play more in 2019? Because your 4 defensive ends were all draft picks. I mean, I get it, but and he was raw because he was a kid that was supposed to be a tight end. Notre Dame's the one that convinced him to be a defensive end, and some De La Salle, so he was very raw. But I think that's where Mike Elston is going to have to really work with him a lot this offseason, is to get him how to win with your – Jason Ademilola knows how to win with his hands. If Isaiah can kind of get that part of his game going, that's going to be the difference between a guy that flashes, 6, 7, 8 sacks or a guy that just becomes one of the premier edge rushers. I think that, to me, is going to be the key for that.
Yeah, and I was going to mention a little of the background. I remember, when he was coming out of De La Salle, he was mostly a tight end recruit. So the volume of even playing in high school a ton on the defensive side of the football was limited even then. So I agree 100%. The one thing, though, that has got me excited about a guy like Foskey is the fact of when we're talking about how you are going to build yourself up playing on the edge, guys that can win the outside track, the guys that have that special bend, you can add that hand usage that you're talking about. You can learn inside counters. You can do all those types of things. The guys that can't, though, are limited to only being that box, in that box. The things that people are going to look like from the scouting community are they're going to look at and they're going to say, can I get a guy that has the ability to bend that arc because I can add on to him? The guys that are pure power defensive ends that don't have that ability to win the outside track, the guys that are just the technicians or just the inside counter guys, just the speed to power converters that don't have any of that, that is all they'll ever be. For a guy like Isaiah Foskey, he could be more, and you can project it. And there's a lot to project with him, which it gets you excited, but also at the end of the day, you need to see it on the field before you get comfortable with him. But right now in summer, looking forward to when he can be and the hope and the projecting forward, I'm excited to see what he can do because I think that there is substantial upside there. I'm
going to say this, Ryan, and you tell me, am I on the right track or I'm not on the right track? And you are allowed to disagree with me on this show.
Sure.
This is how I could see it with him, as I could see him sort of having that year where he gets to like 7 to 8 sacks, right? Shows some flashes of it, but doesn't really have the breakout. Decides to go pro. I'm not saying he's going to. Decides to go pro. I could see some team that picks in the 20s who has like, look, you know what? We've got a good – because if you're picking in the 20s, you've got a good roster. You say, look, like you said, the kid's got everything that you want.
Yep. Right?
Those teams are more willing to say, okay, we're going to take that kid because maybe he doesn't help us as a rookie as we teach him how to play. But in year 2, he's a top 10 pick if he's come play next year, and we don't have a shot to get him. You see guys like that kind of get picked in the late first one. I could see something like that happening, but to get there, he's going to have to, like you said, he's going to have to show that potential more than he can't have another 4.5 sack season and then go pro and do that. But I look at Jason Owe. Jason Owe had this many sacks last year, and he went in round 1, right? Now, I don't expect Isaiah Foskey to run a 4.36, but the point is that's what the teams like the Ravens do. Like, hey, look, we can coach this kid up. We've got other people. We can coach this kid up because if he did reach his full potential, he's getting picked 20 spots before we're in the conversation.
Right.
Thoughts?
Well, so not even just last year. Like you see guys like Leonard Floyd and who's the defensive end? Kiki Mingo coming out of LSU a few years ago. Like you see those guys that don't have the high volume sacks that do get picked. I think what's going to make it tougher for him this year, though, is if he's that guy that's more projection than he is production at that point, is again, I go back to this defensive end, this edge class is very talented, and it is a very deep defensive group in general. So I'm not sure I buy into it just for the simple fact of, like, I think that he's going to be working against a lot of good football players, and a lot of good football players that he might be more physically talented. Because, like, George Karlaftis is a guy that I'm a big fan of from Purdue. Is he more talented than Isaiah Foskey? Probably not. I mean, he's bigger. He's a different player. He's a power-based end comparative to more of a flexible guy like Isaiah. But like Isaiah's probably more physically gifted. But the problem is that George Karlaftis is still a really darn good football player.
Right.
There's still Najee Sanders, and there's
and
still
you
Adam
know
Anderson.
what he can give you.
Right.
You may know his weaknesses, but you also know his strengths.
Absolutely.
And that's going to be a big key.
Yep.
Now, that's the interesting thing, though, is you mentioned 3 guys when you were talking about edge players that you like. You mentioned Kayvon Thibodeau, who's a really good player.
Yes.
Your next 2 guys, you mentioned Najee Sanders and George Karlaftis. Yes. That's another interesting thing because those 2 guys are going to they're going to play Notre Dame this year.
Yeah.
And I've always kind of felt like that's where you can kind of get on people's radar is there's going to be people there watching, and this happens all the time. I know this happens in my business when, coaches that scout, you go to you're popping in film to watch this kid and you just keep noticing that kid. And I think that's going to have to be something too is, like you said, he's going to have something that says that's going to stand out against these other top pass rushers. Right. And Karlaftis and Sanders are 2 guys that I consistently see as first-round draft picks. That's going to be an opportunity in those games to, hey, look, those guys may be a little bit more technically sound than me, but look what I did in those games. And those aren't direct comparisons because they don't play against each other. And you have to take into account, against Purdue, Isaiah wasn't going up against as good of an offensive line as what George is going to be going up against, right? But I think those are some opportunities, kind of like Jack Cohn. I've made this point about Jack Cohn. As far as not draft, but like you look at like Heisman, who are the Heisman candidates? Keaton Slovis, Sam Howell, this guy. And I'm like, well, yeah, Notre Dame plays against all those guys, right? And so those are going to be games where, if Jack Cohn goes out, Notre Dame wins and he has a big game, all of a sudden he's getting in. I mean, if Ian Book can be a top 10 Heisman player after what he did last year against the schedule they played, you get what I'm saying? So I do think there's something to that from that standpoint, but he's going to need to be, but they could also hurt him because you could say, look, yeah, this kid's athletic, but man, he needs a lot of work. And if that happens, they're just going to say, go back to school. And I think he'll go back to school and then come out in 2023. And now all of a sudden we're talking about a more refined product.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that, everybody loves the headlines, right? Like they said, again, you sit down and it's not even the film watching after the fact. It's like you pop on the game on TV and you wanted to watch Najee Sanders and, hey, maybe he has a sack. Maybe he has a tackle for loss. Like he does an okay game, but who's this number 7 that's playing for Notre Dame who's playing the same position as him? So it's kind of a direct comparison, even though they're not on the same field at the same time. But for me, obviously it's I want to see what Foskey looks at in full volume. I also want to see him when he's against the best offensive tackles. For me, the Karlaftis and the Najee Sanders of the world, that's going to be Blake Fisher 2024 NFL draft type of stuff down the road. You want to see how he kind of fares. But I definitely agree that people can definitely steal headlines from guys. Absolutely.
And where I'm coming from is a standpoint of, you just mentioned it about the offensive line, right? So if you're trying to evaluate George Karlaftis, because these scouts go to games, and we're going to be more open this year, more full capacity, all that kind of stuff. Yep. So that's a game where you're not if you're a scout, you're not looking to say, hey, I want to see how George Karlaftis does against Isaiah Foskey. Right. You're saying, I want to see how George Karlaftis does against the Notre Dame offensive line.
Sure.
So that's what I'm saying. They're going to be there. You don't just stop watching when the Notre Dame defense is on the field. Same thing when you look at Najee Sanders. If you're looking at his schedule and you're saying, I need to evaluate Sanders, what's the one game you're like, where am I going to get the best test of his projectability next level? It's going to be the Notre Dame game.
Yep.
Right. And so that's where I'm coming from. And so you're there, you're scouting, both teams, but it's like, okay, I'm here to definitely want to see this guy. And then that's that opportunity. And we see that all the time, but that's just kind of the fun part of this whole thing. So there's a lot of other Notre Dame players that we could talk about. And this is where I say, this is a potential. I'm looking at potentially 3 first-round picks of that group. Jason Ademilola potentially being a day 2 pick.
Yep.
And then Foskey's either going to be a day 1 or 2 pick, or he's going to go back to college, right? He's not going to be a 5th-round pick unless he makes a really unwise decision after this year. Then after that, you have a lot of other guys that could go anywhere from maybe they could sneak into a day 2 or 3 with a breakout, or they could be bottom of the draft or undrafted. But guys that this year's going to determine a lot of that with. And we got obviously Josh Lugg, Myron Tungavaloa, Kurt Heinisch. There's a lot of players on that board. There's a couple guys that you're going to have your eye on this year as you evaluate Notre Dame and look for potential draft picks. So let's talk about a couple of those. Number one is, you're talking about O-line U, right? Let's talk about Josh Lugg. Tell me what you like about him. Tell me what things you're looking about him, and tell me what kind of potential he may have for the NFL draft with a big fifth-year season.
I have a lot more work to do on Josh Lugg. All I'll say is I'm very intrigued because I know he's a guy that, like most of the offensive linemen that Notre Dame gets, was a highly acclaimed kid. And he has the size profile. I think he's listed on the roster at about 6'6" 3/4", and he's got the 300-plus pound frame. He's been a guy that's played both at guard and at right tackle during his career. So we talk about the flexibility to potentially back up multiple positions. But he hits the size profile. He comes from a Notre Dame that has historically put out great offensive linemen. I mean, we've seen it over the last few years. And he was a guy that I think has a little bit of untapped potential because he hasn't been a full-time starter to this day. He's just been a spot starter when someone's been injured. He's been the first man off the bench type of guy is what he's been. I think he's even played a little bit of center in spurts.
Which
so I think
was not a smart decision.
No.
To play him at center.
Yeah,
a 6'7" kid at center with a back problem at center. Come on.
Yeah, I think I caught the game. Was it against Alabama? Did he have a bad snap against Alabama where he snapped his head? No.
Terrell was at center against Alabama. It was against he was the center against Clemson. Yep. Syracuse, I believe.
Yes, yeah. So obviously he's not going to be a guy that's going to play center, but a guy that is nearly 6'7", tackle built, looks the part. Obviously has played inside at guard. A lot of stuff that's very interesting for your projection on the next level. A guy that, again, I don't think it's quite to the degree of a Foskey or an Ademilola, but he needs to play. And he needs to consistently play. And I want to see him comfortable at right tackle a full year. And I know that they were even toying around originally he might be the guard instead of the tackle. And I hear he's probably the starting right tackle full time. I want to see him in a full season. I want to see 3 games where I see one at the beginning, one in the middle, and one at the end, and see how he how he translated, but then also how he improved over the entirety of the season, because that tells me how much better he can possibly get. Because until we see him at a high volume of high volume of snaps, he's a guy that is purely projection. But from a size profile, coming from a school like Notre Dame, having all those, the ability to play inside and out, there's a lot of things to like about Josh Lugg. I just need to see him play football.
Right. A guy that I'm really looking forward to seeing this year is Myron Tungavaloa-Mosa. Now, there was mock drafts that had him going in the 5th or 6th round last year. Even though he wasn't in the draft, there were still people that mocked him, which tells you a lot about those people doing those mock drafts. Anyone with a do-it-yourself willing to do a do-it-yourself website can do a mock draft nowadays. But I just thought that was funny. I had to get that in there. Sorry. I'm very intrigued by this because I have always felt like there was the first half of the 2019 season, I thought he was their most disruptive defensive lineman. The problem is he would always kind of wear down as you got later in the season because he was not a natural 290-pound kid. Now you bump him out to big end, and the question is, okay, well, does he have the athleticism for that? But he's now dropped some weight. He's at a more natural weight. He looked really quick and explosive on the edge. So he is, for a kid that's played as much as he has, he to me is a blank slate because of the size change and the position change. I'm very intrigued to see him because he's a guy that I could see, maybe some teams seeing as a situational pass rusher, as a guy that could maybe be a 3-4 a 5 technique sort of. And the guy that I would be curious to compare him to is a guy like DeMarcus Walker, who the Broncos drafted a few years ago from Florida. Not the biggest guy in the world, but a really athletic kid that can rush the quarterback. So he's a player that I am very intrigued to see how he performs this year at a new position and with a different looking body.
Yeah, I even clipped one play of him that I haven't put on Twitter yet, but there was one play, I even forget who they were playing, where he was on the backside working against a reverse, and he absolutely blew by from the backside A-gap and almost got the reverse from the backside. And I was like, whoa, that is not ordinary for a 280, 290-pound kid. You don't see that. Yeah. And then you hear this offseason, like you said, he loses 20 pounds. He's going to play that big end that I forget the kid that played for Cincinnati last year. I think number 93 was kind of that same type of player. He was 280 pounds playing defensive end. But he was I think Myron has some very intriguing movement.
He's got some twitchiness.
Yeah, he's got some flexibility to him, which is it's a little bit eye-popping and on the interior especially. And then you hear the transition there. My first question is, what is the upside going to be as a pass rusher? You just haven't seen it, right?
That's the key.
I know that he's going to be able to set a firm edge because he's played on the inside. He's worked against some very strong offensive linemen inside. I know that he is going to have a quick, compact, physical punch. He's going to be able to lock out. And I think that he has a baseline for being a rundown specialist at defensive end on the next level. Like, I think that there is a good understanding that that could be a thing. The question is, what can he do against the pass playing on the outside shoulder of a tackle? Can he give you any impact at all? Or is he a guy that, hey, maybe on obvious passing situations, he's a guy that we can move inside? Like, is that what he is? There's a lot of questions for him, but I will tell you, it's not hard to find 95 on the film. Like, there are some plays where he just pops off and you're like, that's not ordinary movement skills. And I will say that he always did seem like a guy, because he has a really clean frame, and he always did seem a guy to me, just following him over the last few years, I always questioned, and you've alluded to it, is that he just doesn't seem like he's a guy that can hold that weight consistently.
I was told, and I don't know if this is true or not, I was told by someone who I trust that he had gotten down to in the 260s at one point in time last year.
Wow.
And they had to keep building him back up because he's trying to play inside. And so that's why I think this is going to be a good year for him, because as you know, when a kid is struggling to keep that kind of weight on, that means when that weight is there, he's not playing at his peak athletic potential, right? And that's the thing I'm looking to say. I mean, look, anyone can be 300 pounds, but you're not going to be very athletic at 300 pounds. And that's the key for Myron. And I think this is going to be a better thing. And look, here's the one thing that will help him. And I could say this about several of these kids. I could say this about Foskey, Kyron Williams, Jarrett Patterson, Kyle Hamilton, the Ademiolas, especially Myron. He is gonna grade out off the charts when it comes to character, work ethic, leadership, like all those things. It just comes down to, so there's going to be like no red flags there. It's about, okay, but can you play at that position? Because he doesn't have the body to play inside as a 3-down interior guy. You just said it. Maybe on third down, cool, but he's not an every down player inside. Yeah. Can you we think you can be a good run defender, but can you win? And it's not just because the burst off the edge helps you win, but the question that I have is, can he close? I could see him winning on the edge a lot, but if you don't have that closing speed and you don't have that length of an Isaiah Foskey, can you close on the quarterback? And that's the difference between a guy that just, he's a little disruptive on the edge and a guy that's like, yeah, okay, that guy can get after the quarterback.
Right. And I think that another thing that is going to be thrown around a lot in the scouting community is body typing, being able to see projecting of a body. And you just said it. If a guy, and for Myron's sake, let's say he's playing in the 260s now, if he's a guy that has gotten up to 285, 290, let's say, I don't even know if that's the right ballpark, but like if he'd
gotten up to there, yeah. I mean, he'd gotten up to that weight.
So if you're a guy that is naturally a 260 some odd pound guy that you're now playing at 290, the twitchiness that we're talking about, the explosiveness that we're talking about, you're sacrificing that. At some point, there are frames that you cannot hold that much weight, because then you are sacrificing what makes you a potentially special football player. And I think that it's going to do a lot for him. And I think that there's going to be a lot of numbers even thrown around him, like, oh, he's a base end, but projecting him to run in the whatevers, and we don't know what he's going to test like and all that good stuff, because the testing does absolutely translate on the edge. It absolutely does. So I think that's going to be an interesting conversation. But what gives me hope is the fact of he's been playing at a much too high weight, and you still see those flashes. Yeah. So how explosive and how flexible is he going to be at a more natural weight? I think it's going to be very eye-opening to see just how he carries the weight at what is more appropriate weight for him this year.
And I think we'll see him making plays deeper into the year. That's the other thing, because he would kind of always wear down a little bit late in the year. And then all of a sudden you get to the bowl game and he looks better because he's had a chance to rest,
Sure.
But I think at a better weight, he's going to be able to play more snaps and be more impactful over the course of the year. Here's another player that I'm very intrigued by this year. And he's not getting a lot of NFL draft love. I like him. I just think he's a guy that could be a day 3 pick, and some team's going to like him because I think that you see fifth-year senior, but he's still really new to the position. That is Avery Davis. I really like Avery Davis. Now, I don't know what the testing is going to be. Is he a 4.5 guy or a 4.4 guy? We'll find all that stuff out. But as he's gotten more and more comfortable playing receiver, he has become a much more impactful player. And we saw there were some moments. Really in both Clemson games, I thought he played well. The difference is in one Clemson game, the quarterback threw him the ball. The other one, when he was getting open, the quarterback didn't throw him the ball. Right. But I really like Avery Davis. What do you see in Avery? Do you think he's a kid that with a 40-plus catch season could maybe get on some people's radars?
Yeah, I think that he is a guy that, obviously he has a fascinating backstory, right? Like high school quarterback turns running back, wide receiver, defensive corner, back, running back, like all over the place. It's insane. I've never seen a guy that has had that type of transition constantly from different positions, which I mean speaks to the volume of athlete he is. Though a guy that has the ability to do that is not. There's not many guys that could do that type of transition.
Because most kids wouldn't stay at a school long enough to allow them to move him. That's something that's going to stand out about Avery. It's like, wow, you battled through all that in this era of the transfer portal. You battled through all that and stayed with it, and you know, I think that's going to help him.
But most quarterbacks, you know, high school quarterbacks coming out, oh, you want to switch positions? I'm out of here, man. I'm going somewhere to play quarterback. And he's been a guy that has withstood and is developed into one of the better pass catchers of the last couple of years. Could he be a guy that's draftable? I think it's going to be close. I really think, you know, it's going to be very dependable depending on what type of season he has. Could he be like a TJ Jones type of player where he's able to stick in the NFL for a couple of years? I think it's possible. It's just really going to depend on what quality of a season he has. I know there's a couple, you know, younger pass catchers that we've been trying to hype up, like the Kevin Austins. I guess he's not that young anymore, actually. Braden Lindsay's, you know, of the world, and we've been waiting for them to break out, but it's just been the kind of quiet, steady veteran Avery Davis that has kind of developed over the last couple of years. So I think it's possible. I don't know if I would 100% say it's likely, but I do think that he has a nice athletic profile. I don't know if he's a 4.4 guy, like you're kind of, you know, reiterating a little bit.
That's my question. Right now he strikes me as more quick than fast.
Right, which is fine. I mean, if he's
a great college, but if you're going to get drafted in the NFL, number one, you're going to have great production, and then they'll overlook that. Or, you know, like if he goes out and has 40 plus catches this year, that's great, but he only has 60, 70 catches for his career. That's not exactly a huge thing. It's going to have to be a combination of 40 plus catches, which gets you on people's radar, right? But then you've got to hit those numbers. I think his agility number is going to be really good. But it's about, okay, what about the explosive numbers, the broad, the vertical? But then more importantly, it's going to be the 40. Can you separate against the next level? Because I think they're going to love his foot quickness because that's what allows him to get separation in college. Right. You look at what he did to that poor Clemson safety on that last drive of the game. I mean, he had that kid running in circles. I mean, he's got that really quick, you know, that top-end quickness, which is important. Yep. But in the NFL, that's only going to take you so far. You have to be able to accelerate out of that great route and get open. And I think that's going to be the question for him. So I do think the production is going to be there. I think that, you know, again, to at least get him talked about, he's not going to have a Will Fuller season, right? You know, and like you mentioned, TJ Jones, you know, TJ Jones had 70 plus catches for 1,000 yards as a senior. And that was after being a regular in the rotation for 3 years at Notre Dame. You know, he had like 20 catches as a freshman. So he's not gonna have that knock, you know, really catch your attention, like, wow, look at that production. But I think it's going to be enough production to say, well, you know, let's see what the kid can do, you know. And then but the testing is going to be huge for him, unless he has some kind of monster breakout season that I just don't see happening. Because I think the ball's just going to get spread around too much. That's the problem. That's going to be the problem for Avery. Is between Michael Mayer and Keys and Austin and we talked to Kyron Williams, Chris Tyree. I think the ball is going to get spread around for him to kind of have that big season that maybe really catches people's attention. But if he can get to 40 plus catches and then go run a mid 4.4, you know, with the character that he's going to have and all those kind of things, I could see a team on day 3 saying, you know what, the kid's played corner, so clearly they saw some toughness that can make you think he's a special teams guy, right? And then, you know, and then he could bring some depth there. So part of it too is, Ryan, is I'm rooting for him. And I'm not supposed to say this because, you know, we're being objective, but I'm sorry. I don't care. It's my show. I can say whatever the heck I want. I'm rooting for the kid because I like to see kids that do the right thing and work hard and have the right attitude get rewarded for that, for doing, you know, for sticking it out in an era where the entire sports media is saying, no, it's okay for you to quit or to leave or to, you know, if you don't like your circumstance, you can just bail and there's no consequences. This is a kid that stuck it out. When of anyone on the team, he had probably as much reason to transfer from a football standpoint as anybody, and he didn't. He stuck it out.
Well, there's things that you can quantify. We mentioned a couple of them: production, and you can quantify the production that he has, and you can quantify the athletic testing, and those things will tell you what quality of an athlete and what quality of a college football player he was. But the things that are the make it mentality that you're talking about, a guy that has had so many transitions, that has been a guy that has had to work for everything he's gotten, and a guy that hasn't quit, those things are going to go a long way, whether it is as a 7th round draft pick or a priority free agent or just a camp body, whatever he ends up being. He has that mentality where he's going to work for what he needs to get. So I think that he has
a lot of that make it mentality. And then, I mean, even throw in, it's a little gimmicky, but like he's got the gadget stuff too working for him. You know, there's always those gadget players that like, oh, he's our guy that is going to play in the slot a little bit. Maybe we'll give him a jet sweep occasionally. He can throw the football, maybe on a little reverse pass or whatever it is. So like, there's always that type of stuff.
You're just sucking up to me at this point in time because you know what I've said about if Notre Dame doesn't have him throw a pass this year, I'm going to lose it.
You love Avery, man. You love Avery Davis.
Well, it's just more about you using your weapons, right? You have a kid that literally you recruited to play quarterback.
Yep.
And you're not going to use him to throw a single pass to at least do it against Toledo to give the other team something to think about, man. Come on.
It's a double reverse pass with Michael Mayer streaking down the sideline. Let's do it. Slide it up.
I'm all about it. Let's roll. And obviously, we're not going to get into these guys, but I'm looking forward to the postseason when we talk about those guys that we don't have on the radar right now. Sure. Some guy that Jack Kaiser or a Cam Hart or somebody like that. I think are guys that I look forward to. And we're not going to talk about any of the other receivers because, there's talent, but let's actually let them see them do something first, before we get into that. But it's going to be a fun season, and I think it's a year where there could potentially be, if Notre Dame has the kind of season I'm hoping for, to have a really active first couple days in the draft for Notre Dame. There's certainly that kind of guy. And it'd be nice to see a non-lineman for Notre Dame go in the top 10. Which is going to be interesting because, safety is one of those positions that has been devalued from a high pick standpoint. Yep. But I think the thing that Kyle Hamilton does that you talked about is you're not just drafting a free safety.
No.
You're drafting a Swiss Army knife that you can use on two different levels of the field. You can do so many different things with him.
Well, I was going to say he's a multi-level threat. Yeah. In fact, like he's a threat on the second level, on the third level. He can do a little bit of everything. And kind of to speak to the rareness of what it is to be drafted. I mean, in the last 3 seasons, the 2019, 2020, 2021 NFL draft, there's been 2 safeties drafted in the first round just in general. We had 2 in 2019. The 24th pick, 22nd pick was Darnell Savage to the Green Bay Packers. And then we had Jonathan Abram that went a couple picks after to the now Las Vegas Raiders. And then we did not have a single player drafted in 2020 at safety. We did not in the first round. We did not have a single player in 2021 drafted in the first round at safety. So it is a big projection. It is, it's a little bit, I don't want to call it a hot take because I think that there's a lot of validity to it because I think you're getting, because in the mock draft that I had, the Jacksonville Jaguars were slated with the 3rd overall pick. They're not taking the quarterback, obviously, right. Trevor Lawrence. So the conversation goes to Kayvon Thibodeau. Well, defensive end, you've drafted Josh Allen. You've drafted Kayvon Chason last couple years. You have that position, at least young guys that have had high draft capital. Then the next guy is, Derek Stingley maybe. But for me, you've also invested in CJ Henderson 2 years ago at corner. I think that one thing that you can't undersell with Kyle Hamilton is he makes everybody around him and in front of him a better football player. Because he just makes up for so many mistakes.
I want to ask you something about, because you talk about a rare type of player. You go back to the 2018 draft. That was a year where you had some different types of DB. I think Terrell Edmonds was a first-round pick, which I still don't understand that one for the Steelers. But, Minkah Fitzpatrick is a guy from that draft I wanted to kind of ask you about. Because he was one of those guys that kind of had that, is he a corner? Is he a safety? How does a guy like Kyle Hamilton compare to a guy like that as a prospect?
Versatility wise, I mean, so you're not going to put him in
a corner,
outside corner, right? Yeah, so you're not going to do that. But from a ability to come down and play in the slot, play some man coverage, play single high, play 2 high, split field, like do all that type of stuff. I think there is definitely a comparison. I don't think that he's quite has the range that Minkah has, just because Minkah's a little smaller. He's just he has a little more foot quickness than Kyle Hamilton does. But I do think that Kyle can do everything that Minkah can do from a schematic perspective outside of playing outside corner occasionally, if that's what you ask him to do. But I do think the comparison makes a lot of sense because, again, we're talking about guys this versatile both on a second and third level of the football field, make a ton of plays. I think it makes a ton of sense. I think Minkah ended up going 11th. I think So I think the difference, obviously, with Kyle is we're not only talking about a rare versatility aspect of a football player, we're talking about that rare size, too. I don't think we can undersell that enough. 6'4", 220 does not come around very often. Even though we have a couple guys this year. The kid from USC, the Palomelo, and then there's a kid from Miami, Ohio, Steve Weatherford, who's also Sterling Weatherford is also a 6'4", 220-pound safety. So we have a couple of those guys, but for this, they have this.
And there's been some guys in the past. I mean, Taylor Mays had great size, but they weren't the athletes that Kyle Hamilton was, and that's they were more like that guy should have been playing linebacker. I mean, that was the difference between Kyle Hamilton and those guys. Is there's been big safeties, but they weren't really safeties.
Well, somebody even asked. I think somebody did like a mailbag question to my podcast and asked like, "Oh, is Kyle Hamilton a linebacker?" And I'm like, absolutely not. He's not a linebacker. There's no reason, no need to move a guy like this. This is a high caliber third level defender.
Now, putting him in at linebacker level again, like Notre Dame does at certain looks as a safety, yes, but moving him to where you're now a will linebacker and you're now if you're only playing him, I feel like this, Ryan, and I know you agree. Yep. If you're only playing Kyle Hamilton on one level of your defense, you're doing defense wrong. No matter, I mean, as a safety, if you're only playing him on one level of your defense, you're doing this whole thing wrong.
Yeah, no, it's you're pigeonholing a player that you don't need to pigeonhole. Like the versatility he brings, and sometimes versatility is a little overrated because sometimes versatility means that a guy does everything okay, but he doesn't really excel at anything.
That's not versatility to me. That's That's positional flexibility. That doesn't make you versatile.
Right.
Yeah.
But the thing that Kyle Hamilton is different is that he excels at multiple things, and I think that you can take a safety. You can move him to linebacker depth. You can play him in the slot. There's a lot of things you could do with a safety. Very multiple ways to use a guy. Saying that he's just a weak side linebacker, there's only so much that you can do with that guy. You know,
it's one of my big pet peeves is when I talk about positional flexibility. People say, well, if he can't stick at corner, meaning if he doesn't move well enough for corner, you just move him to safety. I'm like, no, because if he can't move well enough to play corner, then, if he's not fast enough to play corner, then he's not going to be a very good safety. I think some guys better fit a safety position, just mentality wise, or maybe there's one part of their athletic, skill set that says, you know what, this kid's really athletic, but he just doesn't flip his hips real effectively. So then you move him to safety. He's really good there because flipping your hips as a safety and getting off the hash is a whole lot different than flipping your hips and trying to have to run with a guy at that point of where where you kind of get even. So, but yeah, I feel like positional flexibility is that thing where like the guy's a jack of all trades, master of none. Right. Versatility to me is that guy that can go dominate at different positions. It's that linebacker that can also walk up off the edge on third down and rush the quarterback. That's versatility. That's not positional flexibility, because positional flexibility to me is like that's your role player. That's that guy that we say, well, you're drafting that guy in round 5 because he can back up multiple positions. And so that's one thing that makes him really good. Do you have time for any questions, or you need to run? Do you have time to answer a few questions?
I have some time.
Trying to get through. Tommy Guns was the first person into the chat. So the chat started at 1:00. I didn't get it. I got this one up late today, but Ryan, the last couple of chats we've had people putting things in like 2 hours before the chat starts. I absolutely love IB Nation, man. It's been a lot of fun. So let's get to some draft questions here, and then when Ryan wraps up, I'll go back and we'll answer some of the team questions. And then Notre Dame 2164 says, "Can we admit that Brian is the man?" I support that, Ryan. I don't know what you think about that.
I might be a little biased, Brian. I don't think I can answer that one.
I understand. Okay, let's see if we can get down here to some draft questions. All right. Yeah, see what happens. It's like there's all these comments before the show even starts. I got to scroll through, which I absolutely love, but makes it a little bit more challenging to find. So here we go. We got one. Okay. Tyler asked, Brian and Ryan, this will be for you, Ryan, because you're the draft expert. Do you see Drew White being drafted? Solid player, but not going to blow anyone away with athleticism. And if your answer, I'm going to add to it, if your answer is no, Ryan, which I'm going to predict that it is, what would you need to see from him this year to make you think he could be a draftable player?
I just think the unteachables are pretty limited with him. I mean, he has okay athleticism. I wouldn't call it bad. I wouldn't call it, his size is okay. I wouldn't call him overly physical. Very smart football player, which is great. Like, it's nice to have a heady football player that just seems to get guys aligned and get in the right position. But I think that the other thing that I think that some people underrate a little bit is they look at these under-athletic linebackers, these undersized linebackers. They say like, oh, well, he could be a core team special teamer. That's not how it works, really. Like, they're looking for length and they're looking for speed and athleticism on special teams as well. Are there going to be the occasional Tyler Medikeviches of the world that used to play at Temple where he could be a core teamer for Pittsburgh because he just is such a physical football player? There absolutely can, but I don't think that Drew White has those. I don't think he has, one, the physicality to be that, to, transcend that lack of athleticism to be a core team special teamer. So I think that he's a very fringe player. I don't think he's draftable. I think he's going to come into a camp and they're going to see what they have, but I think that there's just some limitations to him as a football player.
I'm going to somewhat disagree with only one small part of that. And I think he's a better athlete than you do. I think he's a pretty athletic player. I think he downhill. I think he's a quick, like, just get downhill, like, I don't say explosive, but he's got some burst to him. Okay. I think he has some issues when it comes to opening up, getting into coverage. That's where he can show some tightness. But as far as a downhill player, but as you know, in the NFL nowadays, if you're going to be that kind of player, you need to be 245. Right. And that's the problem, right? So he's like a Manti Te'o player trapped in a Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah body. Right. You know what I mean? And I think that ultimately, that with his injury history is going to be the thing that keeps him from being a draftable player. No matter how good he is at Notre Dame this year, if he does have a big year, I think he's intelligent. I also think the other thing that hurts him too is he's not the most disciplined player. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious to see if that was a byproduct of him not trusting the other linebackers this year inside, or which is possible because the lack of production that Notre Dame got from the will linebacker position was stunning. How little production they got from that position. But I do know you like Marist. So you're looking forward to seeing if he can break out a little bit this year at that position.
Yeah, man. I just every time I watch Notre Dame, 35 just pops a little bit for me. And I know he's got some length to him. He's got athleticism. I know he's a guy that is still figuring it out, from where his aiming points are and what he's looking at and doing all that type of stuff. But the one thing I do like is, even when he's guessing wrong, he's going 100 miles an hour. Like, there's no questioning effort. And I can deal with a guy. I always told the guys, like, everyone's going to make mistakes. Make it a fast mistake. And he makes fast, physical mistakes. Yeah. So I do like him. I think that he's a long way to go from just a processing perspective and an eye discipline perspective. But, like, he has, I think, some traits that
he was a redshirt freshman this year. I mean, he's a young player. And the interesting, he actually began his high school career playing corner. And he just kind of kept growing. Here's another question from Tyler. Will Kurt Hinish make a practice squad? Not sure he'll be drafted, but seems like he'd be a solid free agent pickup signing to bring into a camp. So I'm going to follow up with that too. I know where your stance is on this. Yeah. Is there anything that he could do this year that you think could get him into the back end of the draft?
I think increasing flexibility. There's just some times where, and it's not his role, right? Like, he's going to be that guy that is going to play at the point of attack, and he's going to play a physical brand of football. But there's just some times where you get a little glimpse of him working a little bit in space, and he just isn't the athlete. Like, there's just some extreme limitations. And then he's 290-something pounds, playing that one-tech nose position, which is also not that translatable because guys are going to get bigger and more physical, even though I think that he has some really powerful hands and he understands leverage points. There's a lot of good things. Could Kirk make it as a practice squatter for a year or so? I think so, just because I think that he's a worker. I think that there's no question that Kurt Hinish is a worker and he plays very physically. I just don't think – I think from a size perspective, I think from an athleticism perspective, there's too much limitations. And, if he increases flexibility a little bit, maybe he can give you a little more on third downs. That might be a good thing to see, but I just don't think that there's going to be this huge improvement in that area where you say, like, wow, he can give me a little volume of sack guy. Like, he just isn't that guy for me.
Some guys are just really good college players, and that's okay. I mean, that's okay. Matt D asked a question, and I don't know if you know the answer to this one. He goes, but in your opinion, what caused Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah's drop? Was it his size, or as you just mentioned, or was it the heart condition?
The heart condition we got word of, pretty last minute. It was like the day of the draft, and people had started talking about it. It's a combination, in my opinion. I mean, we talked about it a little bit. Some guys, some defensive coordinators, it may be lazy and there might be, it might be misusing of players, but some guys just don't know how to use a guy like Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, which is a shame. So I think that some draft boards, they just said 215-pound will linebacker, can't do anything with him. He doesn't fit my system, which is going to cause the drop a little bit because there's just going to be a less volume of teams that are going to be interested in him. And then when you add that into the heart condition, and I think what really made this cycle different than most cycles is the fact of, with the combine being canceled and just being the designation for medicals, Some teams got medicals back very late. And anytime we're talking about heart conditions, that's unsettling a little bit. And there's a long-term outlook. And some teams, I'm sure at that point, were like, we just can't draft this kid because we don't know enough about this because we just got this very late and we don't know what to do with it. So definitely the heart condition was the big thing that obviously came up late. But then I also think that some teams just didn't know what to do with him.
Yeah. And I think that part of it, it was a combination of all of it. I think all of it factored in for him to drop, in my opinion. And again, linebackers, like other positions, is just one of those positions where we just don't see a lot of guys get taken. Now, there was a couple linebackers in round 1, but it's not like you could have 9 defensive ends going in the first round of a draft. You're not going to see 9 linebackers go in the NFL draft first round anymore. Not I don't think. It's going to be tough. Back in the day, you'd see that, but that was back when it was more of a run-oriented football league, and having a great middle linebacker was something that was an absolute must. Now it's, you're going to take the 3 technique or the edge player or the corner, the way that the game is played. So, Ryan, I'm going to give you a chance to make one bold. I did not prep you for this. I'm going to give you a chance to make one bold draft prediction that you haven't already said publicly. So not Ryan, can't be Kyle Hamilton going in the top 10. It can't be Kyron Williams going in round 1. I'm going to give you one bold, and it can be for a Notre Dame player or a Notre Dame opponent in 2021. So I had to do this to you, man, where you weren't prepared. It's just fun to me. So okay, let's hear it. And if you say Keaton Slove's the number 1 pick, I'm going to boot you out of the chat.
I mean, if you want to go look at my mock draft, I had Carson Strong going first. If that's if you want
I'm
a little bit of
looking
a
forward to
one.
seeing his film. I have not watched his film yet, but I know you have a lot of good things to say about him. I'm looking forward to watching him play. He's got a great quarterback name.
Yes, he does. And, he plays in that air raid system, which isn't incredibly fully translatable. But, hey, he plays under Matt Mumme, who is Hal Mumme's son, which is the godfather of the air raid. But my real hot take for you, and it's going to involve a Notre Dame player, a big projection here. I know a lot of people in the scouting community love Haskell Garrett, the Ohio State defensive tackle. My projection is that Jason Ademilola, at the end of the day, goes before Haskell Garrett because there's a lot of people out there that think Haskell Garrett might be, after this, the Marvin Leal kid from Texas A&M. He might be the gap-penetrating defensive tackle to have in round 2. Might be Jason Ademilola that goes before Haskell Garrett.
That is a good take because, as you said, Haskell Garrett is a guy that's getting a lot of love in the scouting community. And again, he's a guy that, when you watch him, you talk about production. Yeah. His overall career production, despite playing 1 more year than Jason Ademilola, isn't any better. It's a very similar production. So I could see that. And I think there's that benefit of the doubt thing. There's just this, Ohio State D lineman, he's going to be great. I did want to ask, what do you think of Zach Harrison?
I think Zach, we go back to Unteachables again. I mean, 6'6", 265. I think he was, 5-star. He's got some athletic traits. Obviously, I think he's pretty loose for as big as he is. Usually you think of those high-cut guys, maybe lack of the change direction, but I think he changes direction pretty well. He isn't there yet. I mean, he doesn't understand what he's doing. He doesn't understand aiming points. He doesn't have great hand usage right now. He's not incredibly physical. A huge projection, but I think that he has the traits that are very important to playing the edge in the NFL. So I think that there is a good projection towards him. He just is not a guy that has played enough and has been consistent enough to be, excited about within like the top 15 picks. But working with Larry Johnson, I'm sure he'll have him getting right this season. So.
Yeah, and there's certain coaches that, in my opinion, that if you play for that guy, you're going to get a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. We saw that with Notre Dame offensive linemen. I mean, I believe this. You may disagree. I'm going to say it here to you because you're actually someone who would have the knowledge to push back on me. I've said it a million times, not so much publicly, but to friends. If Mike McGlinchey didn't play for Harry Hiestand, he's not a top 10 pick in the NFL draft, in my opinion. I was shocked when he went 9th. Just because there are limitations. Because of what people thought about him or because of what you thought about him?
Just everything I heard.
So you heard that other people liked him in the top 10.
Yes.
But that goes back to my point. I think there's a benefit of the doubt he was given because he played at Notre Dame for Harry Hiestand. That a player that played for some other coach wouldn't have got. Because when I watched him play, what he's struggling with now in the NFL does not shock me at all. Because I never felt like he was 15 years ago, wouldn't have surprised me. Because when it was more of a run-oriented league. But he was a guy that always had issues, in my opinion, in pass protection. So that's why it surprised me a little bit. Just as far as surprised me from his skill set standpoint, in my opinion. So
I get that. No. I think that there is definitely validity to your argument there. I think that when we're talking about offensive tackle and defensive ends, especially, people bank on traits a ton. I mean, we saw I know McGlinchey's not quite the athlete like a Colton Miller was coming out of UCLA, but he was another guy where it's 6'8", athletic, long arms, all that good stuff. Tape was not good at UCLA though. It just was not. He should not have been the 15th overall pick or whatever he was. But he's the other side of the coin, the other side of the development aspect. He's turned into a very good offensive tackle at the NFL level. So it's just banking on traits.
Right, and that's it right there, because Colton Miller, if you'd have flipped him, and Colton Miller was coached by Harry Heastand for 5 years.
Great football player.
You know what I mean? And that's because to me, Mike McGlinchey was as good as he was going to be, and I think we've seen that. And it was pretty decent his first couple of years, but now there's the book on him, and he's another guy that's not a natural three. I mean, I've said this before: when Mike McGlinchey retires in the NFL, he's going to be down to 240 pounds,
he's going to be Joe Thomas.
Yeah, I mean, like that. I mean, So it was an interesting one. So that is going to be it for I believe we are done with questions here. Yeah, some people, the fifth horseman, that when he blew it against Georgia, haunts me to this day. Oh. Yeah. Here's one. Here's a question for you. So Rob IS jumped into the chat a little bit late. He said, any thoughts on Jarrett Patterson projection? We did talk about that early in the show, Rob. Ryan actually has Jarrett Patterson going number 16 overall to the Steelers in his mock draft, which was very fascinating because we're going to finish with this in a second, Ryan. I didn't bring this up yet. Tyler did ask, who's the one player that could work himself into the second, third round with a strong season, not named Foskey? And you already mentioned Ademilola, not named Foskey. Who's someone who could be that guy? I don't know if there is that kind of not that's draft eligible.
No.
Arguably, two of their three best draft prospects are not draft eligible, in Michael Mayer and Blake Fisher.
Yes,
in my opinion.
No, you're absolutely right. The only other guy would be Ademilola. I'm trying to scan through. I mean, any other guy.
Someone that's not even on the radar. It'd have to be like Cam Hart comes out and has a monster year, runs a 4.41. It'd have to be someone that's not even on our radar right now. Right. I don't see Josh Lugg being that kind of guy.
If a Caleb Evans would have transferred over, then it might have been him. But
sure. Yeah, we both loved him. Yeah. It'd have to be someone that we don't see. I mean,
Kane Madden. I'm just kidding. I'm sorry.
Where's my button to remove him from the? You say that because you have the same exact opinion of Cade Madden that I do. So you're trying to flip me a little bit, which I actually dig. I actually dig that. I enjoy that very much. So in your mock draft,
yes,
you had the Denver Broncos. The chat room is about to explode right now. With the number 9 pick in the 2022 NFL Draft, the Denver Broncos select
Phil Dracovic, quarterback, Boston College.
All right, so let's hear it. Now you know my stance on that, but let's get some serious scouting. What is it that you saw from Phil on film this season that makes you think, because again, it's a projection. You're not saying he played like the number 9 overall pick in 2020. You're projecting into next year. So what is it that you saw from him on film that makes you say that guy is a top 10 NFL potential top 10 NFL if he develops the way you think he will?
Yeah. So I actually I have a report file for him for a preliminary grade. I think I gave him a mid-second round grade, which that is, is that
based off what you saw, like what he is? Okay.
What he is, I think, is a mid-second round player right now, but also into that, there's no bump in positional value for that, right? So quarterbacks are naturally going to rise up boards. It always happens. What Phil has going for him next year, potentially as it stands currently, is that there's a lot of question marks in this quarterback class. Like there's a lot of guys. I only have one first-round grade on quarterback so far this summer. Everybody else is
Carson Strong?
Carson Strong's the only one. He was a late first-round grade, so he wasn't even like a mid.
And you have him going number 1 overall, which just shows how insane it is that quarterbacks just get that bump, right?
Yes. Yep. They get that major bump. So there's no other quarterbacks that I have that have a first-round grade. Phil is one of them. That is the next. I think he's my 4th ranked quarterback right now when you put all the grades together. What I really like about Dracovic a ton is from a size, arm strength, athleticism perspective. I've seen people that have commented that he's not a great athlete. I watched him and I was like, this dude moves.
I read a mock draft the other day where the guy had him going in the first round, but he made a comment that he goes, He said his strengths are touch and accuracy. Okay. And his weaknesses basically were athleticism, and his size can overcome his lack of athleticism and his lack of arm strength.
Whoa.
Yeah. I'm thinking, if you think he's a first-round pick and he's not athletic and he doesn't have a strong arm, then he's going to be your number one pick by this point next year. It is just kind of funny that some stuff you see. But I think that when I watch Phil play, obviously the biggest thing he has to do this year, he has to process faster.
Yes.
And it's not surprising he had no spring ball. He was with a new system, new teammates, all that. And it was funny listening to Notre Dame fans bang on Phil Jurkovec. The people in this chat, for the most part, appreciate Phil Jurkovec. But listening to those Notre Dame fans, and I've joked on, you've seen me say this on Twitter, the only people that don't think Phil Jurkovec's a really good quarterback are Notre Dame fans. Right. But and there are some that still do. But they would say, well, Notre Dame offense struggled in September because, they didn't have spring ball. And I'm like, with a fifth-year quarterback, 2 fifth-year receivers, 4 returning starters, 5 returning starters in the offensive line. Yeah, okay, yeah, they needed spring ball. Yet they wouldn't give that same exception to a guy who's never started a game before, transferred to a new team, new coaches, new offense, new players, had 0 spring practices, but he's supposed to just look like Joe Montana or he's a bum. So I think that is the big thing for me, that he has to process better. And process isn't just making the read, but it's the ability to make the read and make the throw on that anticipation, that timing. That's a big thing for me. He was able to make a lot of throws because he's just got phenomenal ability that won't translate to the NFL if he's not doing it sooner. That's my big thing.
No, and it's funny, Brian, last year there were cancellations, obviously. Hey, a lot of spring ball wasn't played, right? It was canceled like the first 2 days for a lot of people. No spring grades last year. So I actually talked to the pro liaison for Boston College last year, and I asked about Phil. I was like, just, your thoughts on Phil. And he said, I haven't seen him yet, right? Mm-hmm. Like, we haven't seen him. He wasn't there. And the guy that got put into so much adversity going into his first year, just for the context of everything, a first starting quarterback for a new team after being in a program for a different program for a couple years. The unteachables, again, we mentioned it, size. I think he's a tremendous athlete for 230-plus pounds. I think he moves exceptionally well. The play against Notre Dame where he's rolling to his left after breaking, I think it was Foskey's tackle in the backfield for the sack, throwing that dart. It was like 40 yards on the run against his body. He's rolling to his left. I'm like, dude, that, like, people can't, like, not many people do that.
He had a throw against Pittsburgh where he was running to his left. He'd broken a sack, running to his left, flips his hips, throws the ball. I went back and it went 40 yards on a rope with Zay Flowers running the opposite direction. So he's rolling left. Zayon's running back to the middle of the field, and he just throws a rope. And I'm like, that's just one of those things that there's maybe 5 or 6 quarterbacks in the entire country that can make that throw. And they're named Trevor, Justin, Wilson. You know what I mean? It's like, it's those dudes, right? Yeah. There just aren't a lot of dudes that can physically make that play.
Yeah, and you mentioned Zay Flowers, who I like a ton. I think he's a really good wide receiver. I liked Hunter Long. Outside of that, though,
CJ Lewis is a nice college player. He's a converted quarterback, But there were some some catches that CJ made where you're like, Phil put that, like the touchdown pass against Clemson. You're like, he threw that where that kid had no choice but to catch it. You know what I mean? Like, and that's the thing he did, and he did all that with so many areas that he has to improve upon. And that's the thing is he is so much more of a work in progress than a lot of other quarterbacks. Where like Keaton Slovis to me is who he is. Yeah, there's some thing. Sam Howell is who he is. Like there's going to be normal jumps that you maybe make from his sophomore to junior year, but Phil Jurkovec is the biggest ball of clay that you have in college football right now, at quarterback, and you look what he did in that and with a terrible offensive line. Yeah, like the way that they played last year. But I think the personnel is going to fit better. They want more of a scat back. I think that transfer they got from West Virginia is going to fit really nicely. I mean, he's not an NFL scout, but that really quick, shifty, out of the backfield kind of guy. I think, and like you said, not a ton of weapons, not a great offensive line, and a system. And here's the other thing too: when you transfer to a new school, you can learn from your teammates about the system that's new to you. The problem with BC was it was new to everybody. Right. So there weren't the linemen couldn't bring them along. The backup quarterback couldn't help them get the system because they were all learning it for the first time. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the thing that makes it unique. But I wouldn't go number 9 because I'm not a draft analyst, so I don't have to do that. But I think for people to not see that there's first round potential there, you're still living in the fantasy world of the behind the scenes character assassination that Notre Dame tried to do with him in 2019 to justify not playing him over Ian Book. But, there's literally one group of people that I know that don't think he's that talented, and that's Notre Dame fans.
I had a Notre Dame fan after he decided to transfer that told me he was going to end up at like Kent State or something.
Yeah,
like
I remember
that. At Mag School, and I'm just like, oh, really? I think he's pretty talented. We'll see how it works out. But I think the other thing that Phil again has going for him is there's so many question marks in the quarterback class.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, a couple of the guys. Carson Strong is a little bit of a projection. I will admit I like a lot of what I see about him, though, so I will project that.
Is he any more projectable than what Wilson was at this point? I mean, he was coming off of an 11 touchdown, 9 interception season.
I will say right now that when we're talking spring grades coming back from the NFL, Carson Strong had a good grade from the NFL. Zach Wilson would have been like a 5th or 6th round pick.
Right.
Like he was not on the radar at all. So it's definitely not as much a projection as that. I think then you got guys like Spencer Rattler who has all the tools, but like, is he going to put it all together finally? Then you have the guys like Slovis to a degree, and then especially like Hal, who I think just kind of hit. That's what they are,
Right.
And for me, I'm banking on upside right now in summer. So like, I know the biggest hot topic of the first round, and a lot of people that have sent me some feedback is that I had Jurkovec going before Sam Howell.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, I'm banking on that upside, man, because I see limitations as a 3-level threat as for Sam Howell, and ability to win outside of structure. I don't see those limitations for Phil Jurkovec if he hits his potential.
The other thing too is I don't understand how I think some people get too stats driven. Yeah. And I'm also a big head-to-head guy. I like when I can watch two guys on the same field together. Mm-hmm. When you go back and watch how Sam Howell played against Boston College and how Phil Jurkovec played against North Carolina, there was no question who the better quarterback on the field was that day in every single way possible. Yeah. It was Phil Jurkovec. I mean, better arm strength, better size, and made way more plays. I mean, North Carolina won that game by 4 because they had better players everywhere else. I mean, Phil Jurkovec had to throw 3 touchdown passes on the final drive. Do you remember that?
Yep.
He threw 3 touchdowns because the first 2 got brought back by penalties. I mean,
it's also like even goes back to the San Francisco 49ers this year, right? Where everyone's like, oh, they're drafting Mac Jones 3rd overall. They went to Trey Lance's pro day. They went to Justin Fields. They went to Mac Jones. You're telling me that they watched all those guys. I know they're not side by side. They're not on the same field. You're telling me they watched all those guys throw the football, and they came away more impressed with Mac Jones than those other 2? You could never sell me on that, ever.
It never made sense to me. If they did that, I don't even cover the draft, and I would have crushed them for that.
Right.
Because, again, I like Mac Jones, really, really good college quarterback. I just don't see it. I don't see the projection to the next level. I don't. And I think Mac Jones is in the wrong era. Yeah. I think had Mac Jones come out when the West Coast offense in its traditional form was run, he would have been a really good pro quarterback. Mm-hmm. Because again, you didn't need the big arm. You look at Joe Montana, right? Joe Montana didn't have a big arm. You put him and John Elway next to each other and have a throwing contest, and it's going to be no question. But you didn't need that. We're now in the NFL, like you have to be able to throw the ball downfield in the NFL now. I mean, you have to be able to do it, and I just don't see Mac being able to do that to the next level. That's just my 2 cents on that. But Trey Lance scares me. You and I talked about this. Those 1-year guys scare me. The other thing about Phil Jurkovec is Phil Jurkovec will not be I can guarantee this. Phil Jurkovec will not get drafted in the 2nd to 7th round this year. Because if he's not a first-round pick, he's not coming out.
Which is great.
I know people that around there, and I'm just telling you, he is not in a rush to go to the NFL. He's going to go to the NFL when he feels he's ready. That's an important thing. And the other part of it is because he plays for Cignetti, who's a former NFL coach. Yeah, they feel like he's going to have a better sense of truly where they're at there in that standpoint. So, Searcher Green says Jurkovec, best quarterback to wear Notre Dame jersey since Rick Meyer.
I mean, most talented, maybe. I mean, I guess you would have to bring up Brady Quinns and those types of guys. But, I mean.
Physical talent, I think.
Yeah.
I think the most 2 physically talented quarterbacks at Notre Dame in the last 20 years, if you go back to Brady Quinn. Actually, go back to Rick Meyer. I think the 2 most physically talented quarterbacks they've had are Deshaun Kaiser and Phil Jurkovec.
Man, Kaiser was a miss for me, Brian. He was a miss.
Well, because you can't evaluate this, Ryan.
I know.
That's the thing. You can't evaluate this and you can't evaluate this. But physically, he has all, 6'4.5", too big, athletic.
Strong arm.
Played at Notre Dame, big arm. It's just you can't evaluate what's between. And there's no drill you can test to tell if a guy has character or
you can't quantify that. That's why that's why the quarterback evaluation, more than any other evaluation, is most in-depth and the most film watching and the most talking to coaches and listening to interviews and doing all that type of stuff, because you can't quantify some things, unfortunately.
Right. No question. Yeah, so that would be my two. I think Jimmy Clausen was Jimmy Clausen was a phenomenal college quarterback, in my opinion.
Sure.
He just lacked the arm strength, and he was incredibly unathletic. He was incredibly immobile, and that was, even for the NFL at that time, was a bad trait. But he was obviously he was the best passer. I think the two best passers to play at Notre Dame in the last 20 years, just the ability to throw the ball in a beautiful manner, is Jimmy Clausen and Everett Golson. Watching both of them throw, Everett Golson threw about as beautiful of a ball as you ever saw. But again, it goes back to that. And for Jimmy, it was, it was that right there. No one was going to play for him. I was like, I'm going to bust my tail for that guy. Pass. That's why I think he was out of the league so quickly. Because usually a guy that can throw the ball like he can throw the ball is going to be in the NFL for 15 years as a backup. Yeah. But you just didn't want to play with that. But, Jonathan says 2009 Jimmy Clausen was beast mode. That was the most underrated quarterback season I've ever seen, because the team sucked.
Yes.
But I say, if you take Jimmy Clausen off of that team, they're a 3-9 team. He was unbelievable that year. His ball. You talk about what was the one of my favorite movies, Wedding Crashers? And he's like, hey, can you throw in He's like, hey man, I was second team All-State. I could put the ball wherever I wanted, right? Which is like kind of, you were second team All-State quarterback in high school. No, you can't. Jimmy Clausen was that dude. He could put the ball wherever he wanted it. And that 2009 season with especially when Michael Floyd was back and healthy. That was ridiculous.
Man. Loves Michael Floyd.
Yes, ridiculous. Another guy, it's all about making the right decisions. But anyway, I think that is it. So let's just I think that's all for the questions, Ryan. So I appreciate you joining us very, very much. I'm going to go through here and answer a couple recruiting questions. If you want to stay, you can stay for those too. But there's just a couple here. But I really appreciate you joining the show with me today. This is a lot of fun. And we're going to try to do this a little bit more, not all the time, because obviously Ryan's got to use his time, take care of the little one, and he's got to be in the film room. I can't distract from his film watching. But, we'll do a little something before the season, and we'll have some fun things. But Ryan is going to be writing a weekly column for us at irishbreakdown.com, so make sure that you check it out there. But Michael Peak says, I have had a funny feeling ever since Dallin Hayden and Gavin Sawchuk committed elsewhere following the Singleton visit to South Bend. Am I alone in finding that sequence of events intriguing? I think that was the case. I think Notre Dame at the time felt really, really good about where they were with him. I think that they were in a situation where they thought they were going to get him. And, obviously things haven't worked out yet. They're still battling, but, I think that's what Notre Dame thought, but they have to close a little bit better. Michael Moore says, I have a feeling we are going to get another kid this weekend. I think so. I agree with you on there. Maybe a couple. Michael Peak says, my gut tells me there are a few kids close that may simply be wanting to take officials after all the COVID shutdowns to experience the process, but may well have made their decisions already. Sort of. I think that there's still some kids that are thinking about letting the process to go take visits because they like other schools and they want to learn more about other schools. And I don't really view that kid as a real commitment, because that means he's like, if Devin Moore, for example, decides to take visits in the fall, that tells me that yes, he likes Notre Dame, but there's still some question marks about he's not completely sold on Notre Dame. That would be the thing that I would feel about that one. Let's see if we get down here. Let's get down here real quick. Hey, Michael P. says, he has been the man for me for a while. I was never able to get tickets to home game, and then one year he hooked me up with 2 tickets at face value. I was a grown man in tears at kickoff. Who are you talking about there? I'm curious about that. Notre Dame 2164. Irish Breakdown needs to come out with a shirt that says "Stay calm and let it play out." I don't know about stay calm, because I don't want everybody to necessarily be calm, because I kind of like the emotion and the energy. All right. Let's see here. Get some more questions. My man Jacob, thank you for the super chat, buddy. The gap closer shirt fits perfectly. Great show, and thanks, Coach D. I'm glad to hear it. I do think they fit well. I got one that was like a little off-centered, and I had to have him send me a new one, but I really like the feel. I really do like the feel of the shirts, and I'm glad that you got yours. So that they've been going out pretty quickly. I have not really. There's only one order that took a little bit longer than I had hoped, but there was a reason for it. But other than that, I think they've been going out at a pretty good time. So I'm glad you got yours, Jacob, and I'm glad you liked it, and I appreciate the super chat, buddy, very, very much. Dan Clement says, as good as many of Notre Dame's running backs have been, none have been great in the NFL since Bettis and Waters. Do you think Williams projects the NFL as a 5 to 8 year starting running back? So obviously we did. I missed this question, Dan, when Ryan was in the show. I apologize. I scrolled right past it. Yes, we both think that because of what we talked about, that versatile part of his game. I think Kyron Williams has a chance to last. I think he's a better version of Theo Riddick because I think what Kyron has is Kyron has a little bit more speed and explosiveness than what Theo brought to the table. I think he was more of a natural, explosive runner. Tom Freeman says, thank you for the continued fantastic content, Brian. I appreciate that. How much can Tagovailoa Mosa improve his draft prospects with the move to N? Will he be versatile? Will his versatility be appealing to some teams? And we touched on this during the show. I think right now, and I'm a little higher on Myron than Ryan is. And Ryan, I think for Ryan, and I think he's taking the proper approach. Where I'm more looking at it as a college analyst and an NFL fan. He's looking at it more from a draft situation, which is, we need to see if he can play that position first, which is very, very true. And then at that new weight. But, I always kind of viewed Myron as a 5th to 7th round guy. If he can be more productive this year, that's going to be the thing that jumps him up. He has to, and this has been my only criticism of him. And part of it's the system that they play in, but he has to be more productive on the ball. He needs more tackles for loss. He needs more sacks. Not saying he's got to have 10 sacks this year, but he needs to be able to have 4 or 5 sacks. He needs to have 8, 9 tackles for loss. You got to be more productive on the ball to really get on people's radar as far as moving up the draft boards. Because I think the production is going to have to be pretty good. Because he doesn't strike me as someone who's going to have like knock your socks off pro day or combine numbers. That's a little bit of an issue. Let's see here. Hey, Bob, I'm going to pull this up just for comedy. I saw people on the OSU board saying that Vernon ran a 5.4 40 at the OSU camp recently. Do you know if that's true? I have no idea if that's true. Here's what I know. Ohio State, coming out of that camp, really, really, really wanted Brennan Vernon. And the reason that they're saying that now is because Ohio State fans are incapable of admitting the fact that they just lost a kid, especially a kid that they wanted. So that I wouldn't put a lot of stock in that. I wouldn't put a lot of stock in that. Ohio State wanted the kid. There's no question about it. They fought hard to get him not to commit to Notre Dame because they want him in the class. So I wouldn't put a lot of stock in that. Michael Peak says, Dan, in my opinion, we will know more about Kyron this season. By that, how much is his talent versus last year's line talent? See, I'm going to somewhat disagree with that, though, Michael, because for me, when I look at Kyron, I see a guy that did a lot last year not in spite of the line. I was about to misquote there. The way that Notre Dame ran their offense, there was often more guys in the box than the offensive line could block. So there was only so much the line and the tight ends could do. His ability to make people miss, and we pointed out the play against Florida State during the show where, Janarius Robinson, who was a drafted defensive end, is just screaming off the edge. It's him and Kyron in the backfield, and he makes a miss and runs for 20, 30 yards. That's not a play that Josh Adams could make. That's not a play that a lot of running backs could make. That was all that yardage was on him. And there was never like big holes that you would think normally that Josh Adams got because teams had to respect. They didn't have to respect anything outside the tackle really. Because in 2017, if you remember, not only did you have a great line, but you had to deal with Brandon Wimbush. And yes, Ian Book scrambled for a lot of yards and all that, but most of Ian's yards were pass play scrambles. Whereas in 2017, you had to worry about Brandon Wimbush keeping the ball and being a legitimate runner. And so you think of the 80-yard touchdown that he had against USC. If you go back and watch that play, and I've broken this down before, it's actually in my RPO video that's on my YouTube channel. is he hands the ball off to Josh Adams, and they're running inside zone to the left, and Alex Bars makes a great block, and Josh cuts right behind him. And so the reason there was nobody in that second level, because the linebacker, the safety, and the nickel to that side of the field were all running with Brandon Wimbush. And so that just gone. If Kyron had some of that, which you can get through a more mobile quarterback, and again, Ian Book was a mobile quarterback. He just wasn't really good with the read zone stuff. Or if you have like a more of an RPO system where they got to respect that, things like that. But, Kyron didn't have that this year. So, yes, he had a great line, but he didn't have a lot of that stuff. So I think he had to make his own yards. And that's why we talked about the Pitt game, because Pitt was basically saying, you're not going to beat us running the football today. You're going to have to beat us with your quarterback's going to have to beat us. And Ian did. I mean, he did a good job that day. Defense helped with that as well. Let's see here. Let's get to some more questions. Brandon says, I'm nervous about Oklahoma possibly targeting Merriweather now that Talon Shetron has flipped to Oklahoma State. Thoughts? I'm very concerned about that. And that's a big reason why I've said, Brandon, that kind of thing, whether it's Oklahoma or Clemson or Ohio State or Alabama, that's why if you're Notre Dame, you've got to get him in the class this summer. If he's Tobias strikes me as the kind of kid that if he commits to you, he's not going anywhere. He's going to stick with that school, barring a circumstance of, the coaching staff. There's a big turnover on the coaching staff, right? Which would be a legitimate reason to decommit. He strikes me as the kind of kid that is going to stick his commitment. And that's why it's important for him to get him this summer, because if he waits till the fall, then a school like Oklahoma or somebody like that's going to have a much better chance of convincing him to go out there. Now, one thing Notre Dame can do to help that is to have a much more productive passing season. That obviously would be a big part of that as well. Notre Dame 2164. I don't think Notre Dame fans realize how good Hamilton really is. And I think part of that is because of how good Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah was. But I agree. He is a special talent, a very special talent. Tyler says, I'd love to see Hamilton blitzing more or moving around. Love Clark Lee in our secondary was a concern, but thought he could have moved Kyle all over the field more. I actually thought he did a pretty good job of that last year, to be honest with you. I think the problem is he had to use Kyle at times to protect other players. He had to use Kyle to protect the corners. He had to use Kyle to protect the Buck linebackers. And somewhat that somewhat limits you. But, I mean, we saw him in the second level. We saw him blitzing. I thought he did a pretty decent job of that. Plus, remember, Kyle was just a sophomore last year. He was in his first year as a full-time starter, and I don't think you wanted to put too much on his plate last year. At least that's kind of my thoughts. Jonathan says Kyron's technique and make you miss ability is off the charts. I agree. Delo G says, talking about Kyron Williams, his blitz pickup is amazing also. He's a very willing pass blocker. There's no question about it. Jordan Schreiber says, not sure if you saw it, but the athletic staff ranked all Pac-10 coaches since 2000. You won't be surprised to learn that Ty Willingham ranked dead last. No, I will not be surprised at all to learn that at all. Chad Williams says, Kyron Williams is Theo Riddick 2.0 with more wiggle and more burst. And I think you nailed that one. No question about it. Charles Faber says, OSU fans are already saying that they pulled Vernon's offer. Ohio State fans are liars if they are saying that. Fifth Horseman, Kyron runs like Julius Jones with better hands and better agility. Okay, I don't quite remember Julius as much because that was at the end of my playing career and the beginning of my coaching career, so I would watch the games, but I didn't really study him. I remember Julius being a big play guy, but as far as his agility, I don't quite remember that. But Kyron is a very agile player, so it wouldn't surprise me. I just can't say it for sure. I'd have to go back and watch Julius. It's been a while, but if I had to guess, I'd imagine that when I watched him, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, that's right. He was more of like a one cut and go kind of guy, if I remember that correctly. Michael O'Brien says, I was at the Stanford game where Foskey turned the game around for Notre Dame in 2019, blocking that punt. The kid sure has long arms. He really does. Brent Nichols says, is Snead commitment coming soon or later? It's going to be coming soon. Matt D, let's see here. Joe Medina says, I hope I'm getting that right, Joe. The defense keeps showing how to recruit at a high level and not reach for project kids like the offense. Very sad to see the offense not improving again. Thanks, Kelly, for holding the reins to the O. I mean, it's easy to kind of to knock that. I'm not going to say it. You guys know what I'm going to say. I want to see what this class looks like at the end of the day before I get too fired up, because it's It's not where you stand on June 30th. It's where you stand on signing day in December and where you stand on signing day in February. And that's going to be the key. So can they recover from some of the struggles? Let's give them a chance to do that. I'm obviously have concerns about it, but I want to see how things play out first. That's how I want to say. I did it. I didn't want to say it, but I ended up saying it anyway. Get some good question. Rob, I asked, Jason Ademilola is a bit undersized, isn't he? He's about 285 right now in the NFL today. That's not really undersized. There's a lot more because the NFL is looking for more athleticism up front. Because again, the age of the 330 pounders isn't as prominent now because so many teams throw the football now that you need pass rushers before you need run stoppers. I think the best end in college in the NFL right now is like what, 285 pounds? Aaron Donald. Okay, let's see here. Okay, some last couple of questions. Searcher Green says, so is Walker a real commitment? I think you're talking about Amorius Walker. Yes. Amorian Walker's situation is a little different because Amorian has not actually gone on any visits by himself. He has not visited any schools in that regards. And this happens with a lot of teams, especially in the South, because there's so many campuses nearby. If you go to a camp as a team, there are times that you can kind of work out as a team, or you're going to get coached by D1 coaches, right? There's advantages to taking your team, a bunch of your veterans, especially to these camps. And that's really where a lot of these was. So when he went to Ole Miss, it was part of a camp. When he went to Alabama, it was part of a camp. When he went to LSU, my understanding is it was part of a team camp. And so it wasn't like him visiting for the sake of visiting. He was there with his teammates. And then, of course, he worked out, and those teams liked what they saw, and they offered him scholarships, which is a good sign. And I hope that carries over into the fall. But it's a little different situation than just a kid taking official visits or not. All right, last couple questions. Here we go. Jack Maluli, how productive would Lindsey and Austin have to be in order to leave early? Would love for Buckner to have veteran wideouts in his first year starting, bridge the gap to hopefully more playmakers. I don't know if it's about productive to leave early. I honestly, if you're them, if you just have a good season and you're healthy all year, that might be enough because they're both going to have their degrees. And you look at it and say, okay, do I come back again next year and maybe get hurt again? I think if you have a healthy year, you almost kind of have to go unless you're, trying to get your master's degree and the NFL isn't really part of what you're looking for. It's going to be tough to justify bringing back 4 fifth-year seniors, and that's going to be the key. Can you bring back 3? Can you bring back 2? How are the scholarship numbers going to work out? Because in 2022, there's not going to be the unlimited scholarship numbers like there is this year. So that's part of it too. So I think if anything, it's almost kind of like if they have the kind of production that they need to leave, it's also going to be the kind of production, if they don't, let me rephrase. If they don't have the kind of production that makes them capable of leaving, is it going to be enough production that makes you want to bring them back? You know what I mean? And that's the tricky situation that Notre Dame is in right now. Jack Maluli, and then do we also believe the Zach Rice comments, Notre Dame making the decision harder, or is that just classic nothingness recruiting talk? No, there's something to that, and this is we chatted a little bit about this in the podcast where we broke down those 2 visits with him and CJ Williams, and that is Notre Dame is now in the game for Zach Rice, where I really didn't think they were. I mean, I know he's in their top 5, but there's been kids that have put Notre Dame in their top 5 or 6 that Notre Dame is no longer recruiting anymore. So, I mean, that doesn't tell me a whole lot. And I've seen kids list Notre Dame in their top 5 where Notre Dame likes them, but the kid has no interest in Notre Dame. It's just, hey, you have Notre Dame in your final group. That says something. So when I look at Zach Rice, it was like they weren't really a factor going into the visit. He'd never been, they just weren't a player. But then coming out of the visit, to your point, my sources again, the same sources that told me it did not go well with Jake Taylor, the same sources that were concerned with the Wisconsin, Shrouth and Hinsman coming out of those visits, is the same sources that told me, wow, it went really well with Zach Rice. So these aren't guys that tell me, hey, it's always great. It's, this was the first time an O-line visited went really well. And so I think they're in the game now. And, what happens next is going to determine where he goes. But I think Notre Dame put themselves in a great position. No question about it. Anthony Solomon says, I hope the person who hit the downvote button did it accidentally. This is the best in the business at the moment. Well, I hope it's not just at the moment, Anthony. I hope we can continue to be that moving forward, and we're going to try to continue to mix things up and make this show better. We are not content with where things are in any capacity. We want to grow. We want to do a better show. We want to do different types of shows. So we got a lot of things planned. It's now just about, how we're going to be able to execute it, carry it out. But the thing is, people who do downvotes, which I think is kind of annoying. I wish there was a rule where the only way you could downvote is if you had to explain why you're downvoting in the chat. At least let us know. Because if there's something you don't like about the show, a downvote's going to help me know, like, okay, well, we consistently get this criticism. Hey, this is the issue with the show. And then we can decide whether, okay, that's a criticism that's fair, and we're gonna make that change, or it's going to be like, well, the show's too long. Well, okay. I always have believed that I'm going to do a show that's as long as people want to listen to. And because if I only do a 30 to 45-minute show every day, then the people who like the longer shows, they don't have any recourse. Whereas if we do a 2-hour show, and we're into 2 hours now, and you only want to listen for 30 minutes, then you can stop listening at 30 minutes. You can fast forward to whatever you want and only listen for 30. But this way, people can, people that like longer shows can have a longer show. People who like shorter shows only have to listen to the short parts that they want. But it'd be nice to have people that would be willing to kind of put their name to a downvote and explain to me why they didn't like it. So then if it's something that we feel we can do to improve our show, we'll do it. But what's funny about it is whether you hit a downvote or a like, either one helps us. So they're actually helping our channel by putting the downvote in there, which is kind of hilarious to me, but it is what it is. And the last question, David Trudeau, being from Wisconsin, I get the O-line pull from the home state, but Wisconsin is not the program Notre Dame is. We should be able to get top O-line commits. And I agree. And look, I'm not going to say, boy, they should have got all 3 of those guys or 2 of those guys, but you need to at least get one. And I didn't misspeak yesterday. I said Nolan Rucci was another guy from Wisconsin they missed. He's actually from Pennsylvania. He went to Wisconsin. But Wisconsin could go into Pennsylvania and steal a kid from Penn State that Notre Dame wanted, but Notre Dame can't go into Wisconsin and get a kid. Notre Dame can go into the state of Ohio and get Brennan Vernon from Ohio State, can go down to Florida and get Keon Keeley from Florida. They can go down to Georgia and get Kyle Hamilton from Georgia, but O-line U can't go to Wisconsin and get a kid. That, to your point, David, you're absolutely right. This is Notre Dame. This is O-line U. This is a program that's competing for championships. Wisconsin is not. And yet they can't get a single one of those linemen from Wisconsin so far. Now, again, 2 of those kids are currently uncommitted. So they're still in the game. It's just you got to close. And that's the thing is, I'm frustrated with where things are right now, but let's see how they close. And, and if they can bounce back and go over the hump, then, again, all that matters is what do you have at the end of the day? And sometimes the ride is a roller coaster. But at the end of the day, where are you at? And that's going to be the key. So that's going to do it for today's show. And I got a question from Liam Gaming. Is there going to be a show tonight? There's not going to be a show tonight. We did a show last couple nights, and I'm about talked out, which I know may seem impossible for me, but trust me, even I can talk too much to where I need a break. So we may do a second show tomorrow night, watch some film tomorrow night, but tonight we are not going to do a second show. And I appreciate you asking, because Wednesday night is the night where we normally have the second show, but we're going to take the night off. I got to get caught up on some work. I have some business decisions that I have to make tonight when it comes to our website and some message boards and some other things. The meeting was very interesting yesterday. So now I got to sit down with my wife, who's my technical advisor when it comes to those kind of things. We're going to go meet here for a little bit. I'm going to have another meeting tonight about that. So there's just some business things I got to get taken care of tonight. And it'd be nice to kind of relax and spend a little bit of time with my wife tonight. So I haven't had a chance to do that much with her lately. So I'm going to take tonight off from doing a show. May do one tomorrow night. I'll let you know. I don't have one planned as of right now, but I'll let you know. But we'll definitely have a show tomorrow at 1 o'clock. Tomorrow on Thursday at 1 o'clock, we're going to look at Florida State. And then Friday, we're going to have the Irish Breakdown mailbag. It's going to be back. So make sure you stay locked in on those. Before you leave, hit the like button. Subscribe to irishbreakdown.com. And I did not put it in the show today, but you can see it there, irishbreakdown.com now. So make sure you check out our website, sign up for our free newsletter. Jacob was talking about the merch that he bought earlier, and you can see the link to that in the description area below. You can check that out. And of course, if you are listening via podcast, give us a 5-star review. But I want to appreciate everybody for being with us this week. We've had a ton of stuff going on, a ton of shows, lots of people in the shows, and I really appreciate all of your loyalty and you guys being a part of what we do. It's so much fun to do this show. And I want to definitely get Ryan back more because I really like talking NFL draft. I know that's not as popular of a topic with some people, but I really like talking NFL draft. And he's really smart. I mean, you guys listen to it. The guy really knows his stuff. And there aren't many people that I interview that I like to listen to what they're saying, and I feel like I can learn something, and Ryan's one of those guys, so I really enjoy having him on. So I appreciate everybody on the show today. Y'all have a safe, great rest of your day, and we'll be back again tomorrow, and we'll see you then and talk to you very, very soon.